Chapter 76 Unlucky Roads. What the hell? Does such a terrifying creature exist? It seems that I have to develop a more powerful weapon. After the shock, Tony couldn't help frowning and began to think about what kind of weapon should be developed to cause damage to such creatures. Is this island so dangerous? I thought that with this, I wouldn't have to be afraid of those monsters. It seems that I'd better stay here obediently, so as not to become the snacks of those monsters. Rhodes stroked the firearm in his hand and couldn't help laughing bitterly. Seeing the worried faces of the two, Chen Luo didn't scare them anymore and comforted them. But don't worry, I've checked the vicinity. There is no trace of other similar species living in the lair of the skeleton monitor lizard before. At least in a short period of time, you, 980, don't have to worry about this kind of lizard anymore. Monsters are coming to attack you. I believe that during this period of time, Tony, your ability should be enough to develop a weapon that can cause damage to this monster, right? Hearing this, Tony subconsciously raised his chest and said confidently, "That's definitely. Weapon development is my strong point. Take a look. I'll be able to develop corresponding weapons in a week at most. By then, we won't have to worry about the threat of that monster." Hearing this, they believed in Tony's ability very much, and the two of them nodded one after another, convinced of it. Then let's do this first. Now that you have a little bit of self-protection power, I'm going to start collecting raw materials for making escape tools. Chen Luo thought carefully for a moment, and then said with a serious face, "I've explored this area for hundreds of miles, and I haven't found any other traces of wreckage. It seems that if I want to collect materials, I can only go farther. But in this way, if you are in danger, there is no way to rescue in time, so you should pay more attention when I am out." Both of them naturally understood this, and nodded solemnly. After saying this, taking advantage of the fact that it was still in the night, Chen Luo also left as soon as he said it, turned around and left, and disappeared into the night. Seeing the back of Chen Luo leaving, the two looked at each other, took a deep breath, and their faces were full of seriousness. Without Chen Luo's protection, the only thing they can rely on now is themselves. On this crisis-ridden island, they also need to be more cautious. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. For the past 3 days, Chen Luo has never returned since he went out, and Tony and the two have been nesting in the base during this time. Tony is thinking about developing new weapons, and Rhodes is responsible for lighting fires, cooking, and guarding by the way. Is there any danger outside? After living so peacefully for 3 days, finally, on the third night, their peaceful life had to be interrupted because the food was about to run out. The previously stored food has already disappeared, and there is not much water left in the base, so Rhodes had to cheer up and plan to go out to find some food. He was fully armed, and after saying goodbye to Tony, Rhodes took advantage of the cover of night and walked out the door cautiously. Perhaps it was because of his skin color that he was well concealed in this dark night, so Rhodes came to the water pool smoothly all the way. This location was selected by Rhodes after careful observation, because it is very close to the lair of the skeleton monitor lizard, so no creatures here usually dare to approach it, even though there has been no trace of monitor lizard activity in this cave for a long time, but its residual taste still scares countless creatures, and Rhodes, who knew that the monitor lizard was no longer there, relied on this advantage to get the water source smoothly, took out the iron bucket prepared by Tony, with a capacity of about 10 liters, and then plunged it into the pool, carefully hit the water. However, just as he was fetching water, perhaps because of the special movement caused by the iron bucket entering the water, an extremely huge figure in the depths of the pool slowly turned his gaze towards Rhodes. 8 tentacles covered with suction cups are tightly attached to the rocks at the bottom of the pool. Each tentacle is more than 20 meters long, and it is about as thick as several people hugging. It is as thick as a squid. Without a doubt, this is the top predator only under the overlord of Skull Island, the deep-sea giant squid chapter. With a huge body length of more than 40 meters, 8 tentacles like octopuses, and the terrifying power of dozens of tons, relying on the advantage of water conservancy, it can even face a single skeleton monitor lizard. Successful hunting can be described as the well-deserved overlord of the deep sea. Now it is such a terrifying existence, which has been attracted by the movement caused by Rhodes, and slowly swims towards Rhodes. Relying on the cover of the night, Rhodes did not notice the huge figure that was gradually approaching him under the water. Perhaps he had never considered any danger underwater. At this moment, his eyes were still on the ground, observing possible dangers around. Just as he was carefully observing his surroundings, suddenly, a black shadow suddenly sprang out from the side and passed by in a flash. What? Rhodes was taken aback, and subconsciously wanted to make a move. But perhaps because he was too nervous, his feet became unsteady, and he fell directly into the pool beside him. The sound of huge amounts of falling into the water came, and watching the waves constantly churning on the surface of the water, the deep-sea squid octopus under the water paused and stopped moving. In its long life, this is the first time it encounters a creature that will actively jump into the water to seek death. Maybe it has never seen such a situation in 1.6, and it makes it feel a little hesitation for a while. In the process of its hesitation, Rhodes, who fell into the water at this moment, called out unlucky, but just as he was about to swim back to the water, he inadvertently glanced down with his gaze. Immediately, the huge figure that suddenly appeared in the depths of the water almost scared him to pee. Shit, what is this? The moment he saw the deep-sea squid, Rhodes' soul suddenly froze, and it was only then that he noticed that there were such terrifying predators underwater. Looking at the other party's hideous and terrifying figure, Rhodes didn't even think about it. Using both hands and feet, he swam up desperately, wanting to return to the shore. While he was struggling desperately, the deep-sea squid finally came to his senses underwater and slowly started to move. Chapter 77: The Curious King Kong. The 8 long tentacles exerted force at the same time, and under the action of huge amounts of force, its body rushed towards the water surface rapidly. At the same time, the long tentacles protruded upwards, and its eyes gleamed coldly, cold and cruel. Although it paused for a moment because of Rhodes' abnormal behavior, as long as it gets serious, it will attack with all its strength, even if it is a skeleton. Even monitor lizards can't escape, let alone Rhodes, who is an ordinary human. However, the moment his tentacles were about to touch Rhodes, the next moment, a deafening roar came from the surface of the water. 03L. The terrifying sound waves instantly spread in all directions, and the water surface was also shaken into ripples. Hearing this roar, countless creatures around the pool fled without thinking, and all disappeared in the blink of an eye. At the same time, the underwater deep-sea squid Zhang also heard this very familiar voice. As if being provoked, its tentacles danced wildly in the water, and then ignored Rhodes, the prey that was close at hand, and turned around, and rushed to the other side. Affected by the opponent's tentacles stirring up the water, small whirlpools suddenly appeared on the calm water surface, sweeping Rhodes, who was about to surface in an instant. Immediately, Rhodes only had time to emerge before disappearing without a trace again. Because of being underwater, Rhodes didn't notice at all at the moment that above the water surface, 2 extremely rare behemoths were engaged in a fierce life-and-death struggle. Roar! On the surface of the water, a huge black figure with a height of more than 40 meters roared to the sky. Its hands beat its chest continuously, and it made a buzzing sound like a drum. The momentum was extremely terrifying. This creature is like a chimpanzee that has been magnified dozens of times. Its legs stand upright on the water surface, revealing more than half of its body. The whole body is covered with a thick layer of black hair. His fangs were exposed in the air, his eyes shone with a frightening brilliance, and his body exuded an indescribably domineering aura, giving people an endless sense of oppression. This is the well-deserved overlord existence on this island, King Kong. Even if he is not yet an adult, the size of this King Kong has surpassed most of the creatures on this island. Coupled with its terrifying body with a density comparable to steel, and its terrifying power of hundreds of tons, it is enough to make people. It stands at the top of the island's food chain, overlooking all living beings. Looking down at the water surface quietly, King Kong's pupils shone with a cold light, and then, a touch of human hatred appeared in his eyes. Obviously, there must have been some conflicts between the two before. Whoosh! While King Kong was waiting quietly, suddenly, a long tentacle jumped out of the water instantly and wrapped around King Kong's neck in the blink of an eye. Before King Kong could react, the deep-sea squid octopus quickly surfaced, and the other 7 tentacles came out together, tightly entangled King Kong's limbs, and then, the whole body suddenly exerted force, and tens of tons of force burst out instantly, trying to drag him into the water. In the water. However, in the face of this huge force from the opponent, King Kong seemed to be completely unaffected. His body remained motionless, and he stood firmly on the spot. Looking at the tentacles wrapped around his neck, a trace of tyranny flashed in King Kong's eyes. His thick arms were slowly raised, and a terrifying power burst out suddenly. Under its terrifying power of hundreds of tons, the tentacles that were originally wrapped around its arms instantly collapsed straight, and then broke apart suddenly. Ignoring the ear-piercing howls from the other party, King Kong tightly held the tentacle wrapped around his neck with both hands, and pulled it out forcefully, and Kuda's tentacle broke instantly. Grasping the broken tentacle in his hand, King Kong slowly stuffed it into his mouth. The tentacle, which was still alive, was constantly swaying at the corner of King Kong's mouth, looking extremely terrifying. Immediately afterwards, King Kong kept moving, looking at the deep-sea squid that was about to escape. He reached down with his hands in an instant, grasping the opponent's tentacles tightly, and refused to let him go. Under its terrifying power, the opponent had no possibility of struggling to escape. As the body was pulled back by King Kong again, the long tentacles were torn off one by one, and then sent into the mouth. After a while, looking at the long-dead deep-sea squid with only one head left, King Kong looked up at the bright moon in the sky, roared loudly, and kept beating his chest with his hands, as if he was venting something. After a long time, when it finally regained its composure, it slowly opened its legs and was about to turn around and leave. However, at this moment, not far from it, a violent cough instantly attracted its attention. The shore of the pool. He held his breath at the bottom of the water for 2 minutes, and finally, after trying his best, Rhodes finally managed to reach the shore. Trying to climb to the shore, Rhodes propped his hands on the ground, panting heavily, accompanied by a violent cough, and his eyes were full of fear. Finally survived. Recalling the huge monster he saw underwater before, he was able to escape from such a terrifying monster. Thinking of this, he felt very lucky. It turns out that being underwater is so dangerous. I really don't want to stay in this ghostly place for a moment. While he was complaining, suddenly, a mass of huge amounts of shadow shrouded his head, instantly blocking the moonlight in the sky so that there was no light at all. 6:57 Rhodes's heart suddenly jumped, and he subconsciously looked back. However, just as he saw the huge figure standing behind him clearly, his face couldn't help showing horror, his feet went limp, and his body that had just stood firm fell to the ground again in an instant. What the hell is this? There are such big orangutans in this world? Rhodes screamed crazily in his heart, trying to control his body to turn around and run away, but facing this unprecedented terrifying creature, his body was completely uncontrollable, and he couldn't move a step at all. It's over. Am I going to die here? Seeing the opponent gradually approaching, Rhodes' eyes showed despair visible to the naked eye, and he closed his eyes subconsciously, just when he thought he was about to die, but after a while, I can't wait for the opponent to make any moves. Slowly opened his eyes, but it was King Kong's huge face that was less than a few meters away from him. Looking at the figure lying on the ground with some curiosity, King Kong's eyes revealed a touch of human doubt. It also seems to be curious, how can it have such a petite kind? Is it because of lack of food? Thinking of this, King Kong made another move. Chapter 78 New Friend? Then, under Rhodes' bewildered gaze, King Kong turned back to the water, reached out to fish it out, grabbed the only remaining head of the deep-sea squid octopus, and brought it back to the shore. Boom! With a loud noise, King Kong threw the huge head with a file size of 5 or 6 meters beside Rhodes. Then King Kong roared softly, looked in Rhodes' direction, and nodded. Is this for me? Looking at the huge head next to him, Rhodes was stunned for a while, and finally came to his senses, looking at the big face of King Kong in surprise. But what he said was obviously speaking to the cow. King Kong, who grew up on Skull Island, could not speak human language, so he only thought that Rhodes, was talking nonsense, pointing to the food on the ground, and kept gesticulating with his eyes. Roar. Faced with the other party's urging, Rhodes also probably understood the other party's meaning. Although he didn't know why the other party was not hostile to him, the current situation obviously made him completely relieved. However, before he could relax for a long time, watching Rhodes, who had not moved for a long time, King Kong seemed a little impatient and suddenly increased the volume, and 10 strong air currents mixed with the smell of blood instantly blew Rhodes' hair upright. 03L. Frightened by the voice, Rhodes immediately jumped up from the spot. Watching King Kong's eyes keep pointing, he finally realized, seeing what the other party meant, he couldn't do without this food. Turning his head to look at the huge amounts of head aside, Rhodes stepped forward hesitantly, looking at King Kong from the corner of his eye. Seeing that it has been watching here, he finally gritted his teeth and made up his mind. Coming to the edge of the head, holding up the remaining tentacles at the end, Rhodes closed his eyes, and the wolf bit it down. After tearing hard for a long time, he just bit off a small piece of flesh, frowning tightly, resisting the bloody smell coming from his mouth, and then swallowed it into his stomach in one gulp. Seeing that Rhodes was finally willing to eat, King Kong was relieved a lot, and his eyes softened. But what broke Rhodes was that at this moment, the other party was still sitting there motionless, and his eyes never left Rhodes' direction. Obviously, he wanted to watch him finish the food, isn't it? Rhodes' face shrank into a ball, looking at the huge head with a height of 5 or 6 meters in his hand. His heart was full of bitterness. After all, he is just an ordinary human being. Unlike King Kong, it is not uncommon for him to eat several tons of food in one meal. Like the head in front of him, he might not be able to finish it in 2 months. And once the other party finds that he can't eat, what action will he make at that time? Then he can't guarantee it. Thinking of this, Rhodes's heart skipped a beat, but he finally bit the bullet and continued to eat. Soon, Rhodes, who had a stomach ache from eating, finally stopped, lay on the ground, pointed to his round belly, and then waved to King Kong again and again, showing that he couldn't hold it anymore. Any morsel of food. He seemed to understand Rhodes' actions. Although he was a little dissatisfied with eating so little of this similar, King Kong did not continue to persecute him. Seeing this, Rhodes breathed a sigh of relief. After slowing down for a while, Rhodes stood up again when he felt that his stomach was not as swollen as before. Looking at the tall figure like a hill in front of him, he resisted the panic in his heart and walked carefully to the opponent. Hesitation stretched out his palm and slowly touched the opponent's body. Fortunately, King Kong didn't react at all to Rhodes' actions, and he didn't show any intention of attacking. Realizing this, Rhodes felt a lot more relaxed. He touched the opponent's palm and grinned, revealing the sparkle in it. With big white teeth, he opened his mouth and said, "Although I don't know what happened, but if it wasn't for you, I would have been eaten as a snack by that squid monster. Thank you, buddy." Lowering his head, thinking about it carefully, suddenly, Rhodes' eyes lit up. "By the way, then as a thank you, I'll treat you to a big meal too. You wait here for me first, I'll be right back." With that said, Rhodes turned around quickly and ran towards the direction of the base. Inside the base, accompanied by a jingling sound, looking at the outline of the weapon in his hand, Tony nodded in satisfaction. According to this progress, it seems that in a few days, this weapon will be successfully manufactured. As long as I have this weapon, even if I encounter a monster like Chun said, I will definitely win. As soon as the voice fell, the next moment, Rhodes' figure stumbled in, came to Tony's side, and said quickly, "Come on, Tony, come with me. I'll take you out for a picnic today." "Picnic?" Tony looked at him in confusion. "Do you have a fever? Have you forgotten where we are now? Or do you think we have no hope of going out, so you gave up treatment?" Neither. Rhodes' face is full of excitement, said, "You know what I found when I went out? That's a big guy. You've seen a chimpanzee before, right? I just met a gorilla that was magnified dozens of times. No hostility, my life was saved by it. Now I plan to go out and cook a barbecue for my savior. How about it? Do you want to come together?" "Huh?" Tony's eyes widened, doubts written all over his face. "Rod, are you kidding me? I don't have time to be crazy with you. I have to start making weapons." Regarding Tony's suspicion, Rhodes didn't have the time to argue with him, so he pulled him and ran towards the entrance of the cave. Following Rhodes to the entrance of the cave, when Tony saw the huge figure standing like a hill in front of him at that moment, the originally indifferent face was suddenly covered by shock, and his mouth opened wide subconsciously. Zhao Hao Hao turned out to be true. What a big gorilla. Roar. Watching Rhodes bring Tony over, a stern look flashed in King Kong's eyes, and he roared loudly. The terrifying roar shook the mountains and forests, and everything surrendered to him. Hearing this voice, Tony's expression changed immediately. It turns out that the roar just now came from it. "Damn it, Rhodes, it's not going to attack us, is it?" "No." Rhodes hurriedly came to King Kong, gesticulating with both hands, as if explaining something. Seeing Rhodes' actions, King Kong seemed to understand what he meant, and under Tony's confused expression, he really gradually calmed down. His eyes subconsciously moved between King Kong and Rhodes. After a while, a flash of inspiration flashed in Tony's mind, and the eyes he looked at Rhodes instantly became weird. The reason why this big guy doesn't attack Rhodes is it because he is regarded as Zhouju? Chapter 79, King Kong's Favor. Although he had made up his mind in his heart, Tony didn't express anything on the surface. Under Rhodes' greeting, he came to King Kong cautiously, imitating Rhodes' appearance, stroking the other party's soft yet tough hair, with a look of admiration on his face. "This island is really amazing. There are creatures of this size. Judging by the size of this big guy, I think even if we meet the adult skeleton monitor lizard Chin mentioned, he will definitely win, right?" "That's definitely." Rhodes nodded affirmatively, then pointed to the huge amounts of squid head next to him and said, "Look, judging by the file size of this head, this one was killed by this big guy. The size of the creature is probably 30 or 40 meters long. But even a monster of this size persisted for more than 10 years in the hands of the big guy before being killed. I think the power of this big guy is definitely much stronger than we imagined. So I figured if we could be friends with it, we wouldn't have to be so cautious." "Being friends?" Hearing this, Tony raised his eyebrows subconsciously and just wanted to refute, but soon he thought of something, and he glanced at Rhodes calmly and couldn't help but nodded, agreeing. "Well, if I want to be Rhodes, you should be able to do it." After saying this, Tony scratched his head and looked at the huge amounts of squid head. His eyes showed surprise. Just a head is so big. It seems that this creature is also a powerful predator on this island. I didn't expect it to be killed in such a short time. I really can't believe it. Tony stood where he was, quietly thinking. With his wisdom, he can definitely imagine what kind of terrifying power this big guy behind him has. With his power, he might be a dominant existence on this perilous Skull Island. If it is possible to establish a friendly relationship with the other party, as Rhodes said, with the protection of this big guy, their living environment will undoubtedly be much easier, and he can devote himself to the production without having to worry about safety issues. Thinking of this, Tony immediately changed his attitude towards Rhodes' thought just now and said enthusiastically, "Then what are we waiting for? Come on, Rhodes, let's serve this big guy a delicious special barbecue made by Tony." After saying this, he hurried back to the cave and began to move the firewood for the fire. Under the continuous transport of the two, a moment later, a large pile of firewood was placed on the open space outside the cave, and Tony came to the side of the squid head, holding the sharp knife that was sharpened a few days ago, cutting the food with difficulty. On the other side, Rhodes began to grow areas under King Kong's somewhat curious gaze. Boom! Accompanied by a cloud of green smoke rising, a group of small flames suddenly appeared and fell among the firewood, and began to burn rapidly. Seeing the sudden burst of flames, King Kong was not frightened at all. On the contrary, after seeing Rhodes lighting the fire, he followed suit to the depths of the pool. Bending down to salvage for a while, he found two boulders about 1 meter high and held them in his palms. Then he imitated Rhodes' movement and started to let the two boulders collide with each other. Suddenly, there was a loud and crisp collision sound, spread all over the world. Seeing King Kong's actions, Tony Rhodes on the side dropped their jaws in shock and looked at each other with disbelief in their eyes. "No. Am I reading it wrong, that big guy? Is it teaching me how to make a fire?" Rhodes stammered a bit. "It's an incredible creature. While having a huge body, does it also have a considerable degree of intelligence?" Tony rubbed his chin. His eyes gradually brightened. Undoubtedly, after seeing King Kong's performance like this, Tony, BJFG, couldn't help but have huge amounts of interest in him. Although he has the urge to study it carefully, Tony is not a fool, and he naturally understands the dire consequences if he angers this big guy because of his actions. With the opponent's size, I'm afraid they will be smashed into meatloaf by the opponent before they can react. Even with Chen Luo's strength by his side, he still has no confidence in facing King Kong's hill-like body. So from the current point of view, they can only try their best to make friends with him. This is the most beneficial choice for them. Thinking of this, Tony couldn't help but move a little faster. With the tacit cooperation of the two, soon, hundreds of caddies of squid were roasted and sent to King Kong. Looking at the steaming food under his body, and then at Rodby's waving movements, King Kong also understood what the other party meant and grabbed the food on the ground curiously. All sent to the entrance turn. Although King Kong has quite good intelligence, it has no experience of intrigue in the human world, but it has no sense of guarding against similar and seems to trust it. Chew carefully for a moment. Then, under the expectant eyes of the two, King Kong's eyes lit up, as if he was very satisfied with the food delivered. He stretched out his hand again and looked at the two expectantly. Seeing each other's performance, the two people who had been busy for a long time finally couldn't help it. They smiled and looked at each other, and their hearts suddenly cheered up a lot. Obviously, King Kong was very satisfied with the barbecue they made. So King Kong also had a little more favorable opinion of Tony Rhodes. It may be due to the desire for the unique food such as barbecue. In the next 3 days, King Kong will bring the prey carcass here after hunting every time, and let the two make some barbecue for the tooth-fighting sacrifice. Definitely, with King Kong's size, no matter how hard the two of them work, they can't cook out its terrifying amount of food. Therefore, most of the time, King Kong still eats raw food. After these 2 days, as the two became more and more familiar with King Kong, the relationship between the two parties was further drawn in. At the same time, as the exchanges between the two parties became more frequent, the actions of Tony Rhodes' gestures, King Kong can roughly understand what they mean. On this day, in the open space outside the cave, a huge amount of bonfire was burning in the night sky. Rhodes held food skewered with iron rods in his hand and roasted it on the bonfire. At the same time, he turned his head to look at King Kong from time to time, making gestures. King Kong on the side sat cross-legged quietly on the ground, watching Rhodes' movements without blinking, as if he was learning how to roast meat, with a very focused expression. While Rhodes was teaching King Kong, there was a huge amount of movement in the dense forest not far away. Chapter 80 Chen Luo returns. King Kong changes. Boom! King Kong was awakened instantly by the huge amounts of movement, stood up and looked forward, and roared loudly. Roar! The terrifying sound waves spread rapidly to the surroundings, causing a slight vibration in the nearby air, and the dense forest seemed to be trembling for it. Countless fallen leaves fell to the ground one after another, becoming the nutrients of the soil. Bang, bang, bang. He beat his chest hard, and there was a dull humming like a drum. At the same time, a terrifying breath rose from King Kong's body. Affected by this breath, all creatures within a radius of nearly 10 miles scattered and fled. Dare, stay for the slightest. In just a short moment, with King Kong's position as the center, within a radius of 10 miles, it suddenly became silent. As if feeling this breath, the original loud noise from the dense forest also stopped, and there was no more sound. But at the next moment, like a sharp arrow, a black shadow quickly cut through the air and rushed towards the cave. Rod, are you okay? Where is Tony? No, let's go. I just heard that there is. In an instant, Chen Luo appeared in front of Rhodes and was about to say something anxiously. The next moment, when his eyes accidentally glanced behind Rhodes, he saw the huge figure like a hill and was about to say something. The words stopped immediately. With protruding eyes and staring straight ahead, Chen Luo opened his mouth slightly, his eyes full of disbelief. This is King Kong? Turning his head stiffly, looking at Rhodes, Chen Luo's face was full of doubts. Rods, what's going on? How did you meet? Also, why didn't it attack you? Seeing Chen Luo suddenly appear in front of him, Rhodes was also very happy and immediately told him what happened in the past few days. After saying this, he seemed to think of something, looked at Chen Luo with some puzzlement, and asked, Chen, you just said, this big guy is called King Kong? How did you know? Oh, I also saw it from a distance when I went out to look for materials a few days ago, so I chose a random name. Definitely, you can call it anything else if you want. Chen Luo rolled his eyes and soon thought of a reason. So that's the case. King Kong is quite suitable for this big guy. Rhodes nodded with satisfaction, came to King Kong, stroked its hair, and said with a smile, Big guy, we'll call you King Kong from now on. Hope you like this name. As if he understood Rhodes' words, King Kong gave a soft growl in response. Chen Luo on the side watched the interaction between the two, and his eyes kept scanning back and forth between the two. Suddenly, he seemed to think of something, and his face instantly became weird. Could it be? No way? Just when Chen Luo was doubting his life, behind him, a familiar voice sounded. Did you notice it too, Chen? Hearing this, Chen Luo subconsciously turned around, looked at Tony's equally weird expression, and instantly understood his thoughts. The two looked at each other, nodded tacitly, and watched the interaction between Rhodes and King Kong, not daring to say a word. After a while, the three of Chen Luo were sitting together by the campfire. Looking in Chen Luo's direction, Tony's eyes were full of expectation. How about it, Chen? Are the materials here? Facing Tony's question, Chen Luo nodded lightly, looked at King Kong at the side, and said with a wry smile. The belt was brought back, but just as I was dragging the materials back, I heard King Kong's voice. At that time, I thought you were in danger, so I left the things first and rushed back. But since you're all fine, then I'll go back and get it. After speaking, Chen Luo immediately planned to leave. However, before he could take any action, Rhodes took the initiative to stand up and dissuaded him. Okay, Chen, you've been traveling outside for so many days, it's time for you to take a good rest. Leave the rest of the work to me and King Kong. Hearing this, Chen Luo was stunned for a moment, turned his head to look at the other party, and said in surprise, You mean, you can get King Kong to help you now? That definitely. Rhodes nodded, and then seemed to think of something, and said in amazement, You may not understand King Kong's ability to learn, but after only 2 days, it has been able to roughly understand most of my intentions, and with my relationship with King Kong, it's not a problem for it to help. Seeing that Rhodes was so confident, Chen Luo was also a little curious about how far he could go. So after telling Rhodes where he put down the material, Chen Luo sat aside, waiting for his performance. Seeking flowers 0. Then, under the surprised gazes of Chen and Luo, Rhodes came to King Kong, and he didn't know what he was gesticulating. The next moment, King Kong stretched out his palm, put Rhodes in his palm, and then stood up, striding towards the distance. Is this really okay? Looking at the back of the other party leaving, Chen Luo and the two couldn't help but widen their eyes and exclaimed. After a while, accompanied by a huge amount of noise, when King Kong appeared in front of the two of them again, he was holding 10 large plane wreckages in its hands. The moment he saw the wreckage, Tony's eyes lit up instantly, and he stepped forward to check it immediately. 0. Not long after, when he came back again, his expression was a little excited, and he said, Great Chen, the wreckage you brought back contains a lot of things that can be used. Moreover, the fuselage is not too corroded. It seems that the year that it should have crashed here should not be too long. The steel materials are still intact. Can be used. Hearing this, Chen Luo also showed a smile on his face and asked impatiently, How about it? With these materials, are you sure you can make what you want? Hearing this, Tony's smile faltered. He was silent for a moment and said in a deep voice, No, it's not enough. According to my calculations, these materials are only enough to build about 1/3 of the fuselage, and there is still a lot of gaps to complete the construction. Is that so? Chen Luo sighed softly and said helplessly, Then I can only run a few more times. I hope I'm lucky enough to discover something this time. It took Chen Luo a week to explore a range of thousands of miles before he found this little harvest. According to his understanding, the island has a file size of tens of thousands of square kilometers, and the area he explored is only a small part. It may take nearly a year to complete the exploration. It is hard to imagine how difficult it is to find what you want in such a huge amount of islands. Therefore, when Chen Luo thinks about the workload he is about to face, Chen Luo also feels his scalp tingling. Just as he was having a headache, the next moment, Rhodes' voice came. Chapter 81 Walking Together. Danger is approaching. Sean, Tony. Rhodes trotted all the way to the two of them. His face couldn't hide his excitement, and he couldn't wait to say, I just made a big discovery. Do you know that when I took King Kong to look for the plane wreckage you left behind Chin, it seemed to recognize this thing? If I guessed correctly, it should know where there are these wreckages on this island. Hearing this, Chen Luo was stunned for a moment, then reacted immediately, with excitement reappearing on his face, and said, That's right. I even forgot that King Kong has lived on this island for decades, so he must be more familiar with the situation here than we are. With its help, we can definitely find enough materials. Hearing Chen Luo's words, Tony's eyes lit up instantly. Then what are we waiting for? Hurry up and ask King Kong to help us find the 207 materials. After staying on this broken island for so many days, I've had enough. How many beautiful ladies are waiting for me outside? I have to hurry out. Speaking of this, Tony seemed to think of something, and suddenly said with a bit of annoyance, Damn it, I shouldn't have said that I was going to go on an adventure. After all, the party is the best for me. Don't worry, Tony, with the help of this big guy, we'll be out soon. Then you can play as long as you want. Rhodes turned his head and looked at the huge figure like a hill behind him. His eyes were full of love that couldn't be concealed. By the way, Tony, when we leave this island, you must develop a means of transportation that can pass freely here as soon as possible. I will always come and see this big guy. Hearing this, Tony looked at Rhodes with an inexplicable smile in his eyes. It seems you and King Kong have a very good relationship. Yeah, you look like brothers. Chen Luo looked at Rhodes seriously and said. Rhodes didn't realize the meaning of Chen Luo's words. On the contrary, he nodded seriously and said, To be honest, I really like this big guy. It's a pity that it's too big. If it's as big as ours, I really want to take it back to the human world to see. Hearing these words, Chen Luo and Chen Luo looked at each other. The smiles on their faces gradually disappeared, and their expressions became much more serious. Tony shrugged and said helplessly, Okay then. Originally, I wanted to go back and take a good rest, but it seems that I can only postpone it for a few months. Bermuda's climate may be a big problem for others, but for Tony, as long as he is serious, it is definitely not difficult to solve. Later, after some communication between Rhodes and King Kong, as expected, King Kong did know where there were related wreckages, just as they thought. After learning the news, the three of them deliberated and finally decided to set off at the same time and follow King Kong to search for it. The reason why Chen Luo was allowed to go alone was because Tony didn't have the strength to protect themselves at that time, so they could only wait here. But it's different now, not to mention the protection of King Kong around them now, but the weapons they have now are enough for them to protect themselves. In the past few days, Tony has not been idle. After nearly a week of production, finally, after making large-scale changes to the individual bazooka, the power of this big killer has been improved by huge amounts of. Even if he encounters a monster like the skeleton lizard again, with this big killer in his hand, Tony still has enough confidence to kill him with one shot. Before Chen Luo was lucky, he was able to find such a large piece of useful materials alone. Without Tony to identify it, if the materials were not usable, it would undoubtedly waste a lot of time. Therefore, Chen Luo has no reason to refuse Tony's request to search together. As for Rhodes, not to mention, among the few of them, he had the best relationship with King Kong, and without him, Chen Luo would not be as proficient as Rhodes in how to communicate with King Kong. Coupled with Rhodes' own military accomplishment, with a weapon in his hand, his strength should not be underestimated, so it is also necessary to bring him. As for what to do with the base after the three of them leave at the same time, there is no need to worry about this. After all, in the base, apart from a large pile of mechanical products, there is nothing else. Unless a monster that feeds on steel suddenly appears in such a place, absolutely no other creatures will be interested in it. Afterwards, after bringing some food, water, and some weapons and equipment, the three of them followed King Kong's pace and moved forward. In this walk, nearly a month has passed. Following King Kong's footsteps, the three of them have also seen many strange creatures along the way in the past month. Passing by a huge, bottomless lake, I met the lone reef bull devil who is docile and never leaves the water easily. There is also the top predator from the dinosaur era, the Tyrannosaurus rex, after passing through layers of dense forests and arriving at a huge wasteland, and a terrifying giant crocodile with a body length of more than 30 meters living in a huge swamp. But even the Tyrannosaurus rex, known for its ferocity and brutality, is still an extremely brutal prehistoric giant crocodile. Facing King Kong, the overlord on Skull Island, they still shy away. Among the three terrains with different environments, the three also gained a lot. In these places, they also successfully collected the relevant materials, and then packed them back to the vicinity of the base. In this way, after 3 consecutive times, most of the materials Tony needed were collected. Judging from this progress, perhaps they only need to collect the materials once more to meet Tony's request. After hearing the news, the three of them were also very excited. Under the temptation of going home soon, they couldn't wait to start the next journey. So, nearly 2 weeks later, King Kong led the three of them, and after traveling thousands of miles, finally arrived at the 2.6 destination. In the huge amounts of valley, after a group of people walked forward for about an hour, they finally found the wreckage of the plane they had been looking for on the top of a small hill surrounded by green plants. Great! Finally found it! The moment they saw the wreckage, the three of them heaved a sigh of relief and couldn't help showing a gleam of joy in their eyes. Now that the last missing materials have been collected, as long as they are brought back to the base, they will be able to leave the island in a short time. Thinking of this, the three of them couldn't help but feel deeply moved. However, just when the three of them were happy, they didn't notice at all. In the part of the hill facing them, a huge hole with a width of tens of meters suddenly heard a slight sound. Chapter 82: The Skeleton Monitor Attacks. New Choices. Accompanied by a rustling sound, a huge, hideous head with a skull mask slowly poked out from the hole. Huge amounts of head swinging around, as if sensing something. Soon, it seemed to sense something, and its head suddenly turned to the direction where Chen Luo and his party were. A cold and cruel murderous intent flashed in the beast's pupils, and its body slowly crawled out of the hole. A huge body more than 20 meters long, with thick and slender limbs supporting the body, with extremely sharp claws at the end, and a flexible tail like a swimming snake. The head is covered by a white skull mask, and the mouth is open. Several rows of teeth, shining with cold light, are distributed among them. It looks ferocious and terrifying. There is no doubt that this is an adult monitor lizard, which is not at the same level as the juvenile monitor lizard that was only about 7 or 8 meters in length that Chen Luo and the other three met last time. Apex Predator. After the skeleton monitor lizard got out of the hole, it suddenly turned to where Chen Luo 19 and the others were, raised its head and roared. Roar! On the other side of the mountain, the few people who were still immersed in surprise were awakened by the huge amounts of roar, and their expressions became a little confused. This voice, why does it sound familiar? I always feel as if I've heard this voice somewhere. A trace of doubt flashed in Chen Luo's eyes. After thinking about it carefully for a moment, he suddenly seemed to remember something, and his face suddenly changed slightly. However, before he could speak, the next moment, a long-lost system notification sound came. Ding! It has been detected that the host is about to face a crisis. Open it now and choose. Option 1. Face the coming skeleton monitor lizard head-on and kill them all. Reward: a blue bonnet flower. Option 2. Escape from the pursuit of the skeleton monitor lizard. Reward: 10 attribute points. Seeing this choice, a look of excitement visible to the naked eye suddenly appeared on Chen Luo's face, and he made a decision immediately without even thinking about it. I choose the first one. The selection has been confirmed. After the host completes the selection, rewards will be issued. Immediately afterwards, the sound of the system fell into silence again. But Chen Luo has no time to pay attention to these things anymore. Thinking that the reward he has dreamed of is in front of him, his heart is extremely hot at this moment. Nearly 3 months have passed, and finally, the system that has been pretending to be dead has finally made a move, and it released such a big move as soon as it appeared, which made Chen Luo a little excited. It turned out that he was still thinking about when he would be able to get the blue bonnet flower that can completely make up for his weakness, so he even planned to wait for a long time. However, he never expected that the surprise would come so suddenly. After only waiting for 3 months, he would have such an opportunity. And if he misses such an opportunity, it is unknown when he will meet again next time. Therefore, no matter what, he will not miss this opportunity to get the blue bonnet flower. Knowing that the skeleton monitor lizard was coming, Chen Luo didn't dare to neglect it all. He hurriedly turned his head to look at Tony and the two, and said quickly, "That was the sound of the skeleton monitor lizard just now. It is coming soon. You two find a place to hide first. King Kong and I will block them." What? Skeleton monitor lizard? Hearing Chen Luo's words, the two suddenly realized, and finally remembered where they had heard this voice before. Recalling the horror of the monitor lizard, the two did not dare to neglect it all. They searched around for a while, and they quickly found the hiding place. Rhodes immediately communicated with King Kong and asked him to put them on the high platform exposed by the cliff behind him. Although Tony, Rhodes, and the others don't have the strength to face that kind of monster head-on like Chen Luo, they can't do anything. After all, they have a lot of weapons and ammunition at the moment. Relying on these equipments, they can also help Chen Luo and King Kong to some extent. And just when King Kong was placing Tony and the two behind him, accompanied by a terrifying roar, a figure with huge amounts of suddenly sprang out, opening its mouth full of sharp fangs. Continue to rush towards King Kong's side. Seeing this, Chen Luo didn't even think about it. He moved his feet and immediately stepped forward to rescue. The figure turned into a sharp arrow, a body comparable to steel, coupled with the terrifying speed beyond the speed of sound, endowed Chen Luo with invincible and terrifying kinetic energy, and slammed towards the monitor lizard's neck fiercely. Click! A crisp sound came, followed by the monitor lizard's painful wail. As if it came from a natural instinct, just before Chen Luo launched the attack, the opponent seemed to feel the danger and forcibly controlled his body to stop. However, even so, its huge amounts of body still couldn't completely avoid Chen Luo's attack, and was hit by one of its heads on the lower jaw, smashing the bones of its lower jaw into pieces. Without the support of the bones, the monitor lizard's mouth was pulled down feebly. Barton couldn't use any more strength and couldn't control the mouth to close, which meant that the opponent's terrifying bite force had failed, and the threat was even greater. It is greatly reduced. Accompanied by the roar of pain, the monitor lizard's cold and cruel animal pupils turned to Chen Luo's direction in an instant, and its tail swung behind it, drawing an afterimage in the air, and then swept towards Chen Luo's south. Although the speed of the other party's tail flicking was astonishingly fast, even faintly reaching the speed of sound, it was still within Chen Luo's reaction range. With a quick leap back, 683 successfully dodged the other party's attack. At the same time, King Kong finally reacted, turned around, and looked at the figure of the natural enemy in front of him. His eyes turned red instantly. With an angry roar, he immediately spread his legs and rushed towards the monitor lizard in big strides. Also being the dominant existence on the island, the skeleton monitor lizard was also not to be outdone. Moving its flexible limbs, it also launched a charge. Boom! There was a dull impact sound, but as soon as they approached, the two giant beasts immediately started a bloody fight. Even though the monitor lizard was unable to bite its opponent because of the broken mandible, it still used its sharp claws to scratch King Kong's body, and its huge amounts of tail kept swinging, whipping King Kong's chest, and roared loudly. Hooray! But no matter how much it struggled, under King Kong's invincible strength, it found the right moment. Its palms grabbed the monitor lizard's neck tightly, and then broke it hard. Click! Accompanied by a huge and painful roar, the monitor lizard's struggling movements gradually weakened, and soon it remained motionless and died. Roar! After winning, King Kong beat his chest vigorously and roared to the sky. However, before everyone was happy, the next moment, one after another roared from not far away. Hearing this familiar voice, everyone's expressions changed. Chapter 83 Siege. Desperate Situation. Roar! Under the watchful eyes of Chen Luo and the others, behind the hill, several adult skeleton monitor lizards with the same size of more than 20 meters rushed out one after another, and stood in front of Chen Luo and King Kong in a row, with cold eyes shining in their eyes. Killing intent. Looking at these monitor lizards with almost the same size, Chen Luo's face became a little dignified, and he began to think secretly. After the system's reminder before, he was not at all surprised that there would be a few monsters like this again. As one of the two well-deserved overlord creatures on this island, although each skeleton monitor lizard has the terrifying power to hunt and kill Tyrannosaurus Rex, if all 6 of them add up, even King Kong would not be their opponent. In a head-on confrontation, Chen Luo, who only has a strength of a few tons, will not be an opponent of a giant lizard with a strength of tens of tons, but the premise is to hit the target. With an advantage in speed, even if he is not as powerful as the opponent, Chen Luo can still avoid the opponent's attack, and then use the method just now to defeat the opponent. Even in the face of the simultaneous attack of 6 monitor lizards, Chen Luo is not afraid at all, not to mention that he has King Kong's help and King Kong as a restraint. As long as he finds the right time to attack, these monsters will also be there. Not difficult to solve. And once the 6 monitor lizards are dealt with, Chen Luo will undoubtedly get the reward he dreamed of. Thinking of the Bianhua flower that he will soon get, Chen Luo couldn't help feeling excited. However, before he could be excited for long, the next moment, accompanied by an unprecedented roar, Chen Luo woke up instantly. He raised his head subconsciously, and when he saw the huge monster slowly coming out from behind the hill, a trace of shock appeared in his eyes. The terrifying body with a length of more than 50 meters is several meters larger than that of King Kong, with huge amounts of white skull mask attached to the head. Just standing on the ground on all fours, it is twice as tall as the 6 monitor lizards before. Opened its mouth wide, and there were dense rows of sharp teeth in it, which looked hideous. Looking at the terrifying aura that the opponent exuded when he appeared on the stage, as well as the huge body that was somewhat larger than King Kong, Chen Luo had already vaguely guessed the identity of this giant beast. The king of the skeleton monitor lizard clan. To be able to grow to such an extent, he really deserves to be called the natural enemy of the King Kong clan. Chen Luo secretly sighed in his heart. At the same time, looking at the opponent's huge amounts of size, he also secretly became a little unsure. Although his attack could cause damage to other giant lizards before, if he is facing this huge monster, whether he can still cause damage to it is not an issue. Well said. Thinking of this, Chen Luo's face suddenly became much more serious. However, before he could think about it, the next moment, with the roar of the skeleton monitor lizard king, The other 6 monitor lizards rushed towards Chen Luo and King Kong respectively as if they had received some orders. The monitor lizards were divided into 2 teams, each in groups of 3, and attacked Chen Luo and King Kong respectively. Behind them, the giant skeleton monitor lizard remained motionless, as if observing the battle situation. Facing the coming attack, Chen Luo's eyes flashed sharply, he moved his feet, and his figure disappeared in place immediately. Under Chen Luo's full speed, coupled with his steel-like body, Chen Luo repeated his old trick, randomly selecting a monitor lizard and slammed straight into it. Even though the eyes can't keep up with Chen Luo's movements, the monitor lizard's perception is extremely sharp. Just like the monitor lizard before, it subconsciously made dodge movements. But this time, Chen Luo's luck was not as good as last time. Under the opponent's dodge, although Chen Luo also successfully bumped into the opponent, he did not hit the opponent's bones, but was embedded in the opponent's body muscles. It will no longer be able to advance an inch. Although the opponent's body density was not as strong as Chen Luo's, it was still astonishing. Chen Luo's impact only pierced through the opponent's muscles less than 1 meter before he was firmly stuck by the opponent's muscles and remained motionless. Although it still caused damage to him, it didn't affect the other party's actions at all. On the contrary, he attacked Chen Luo more and more frantically as if he had angered the other party. Faced with the crazy attack of the 3 monitor lizards, Chen Luo was also blinded by the killing. Relying on the advantage of speed, while avoiding the opponent's attack, his body continued to turn into shells and fiercely slammed into the opponent's body. Even though they had a premonition of Chen Luo's attack, they were not so lucky every time. Under Chen Luo's attack again and again, soon, a monitor lizard couldn't dodge and was hit by Chen Luo on the neck on the spot. Click. Roar. A painful wailing sounded, and the neck of the monitor lizard was smashed into pieces by Chen Luo in an instant, and its body fell to the ground weakly. Nice job, Chen. Seeing this scene, the 2 of Tony, who were watching the battle ahead with all their attention, subconsciously cheered, their expressions extremely excited. However, before they were happy, the next moment, the monitor lizard king who had been watching the battle suddenly roared angrily, with a fierce light in his eyes, and glanced between Chen Luo and King Kong for a moment. Then, slowly took a step. To everyone's surprise, its target was not Chen Luo, who had achieved amazing results just now. Instead, it aimed at King Kong, and while the opponent was being entangled by 3 other monitor lizards, it opened its mouth wide, roaring and rushed in the direction of King Kong. Not good. That guy is going to attack King Kong. Tony's face changed, and a trace of nervousness flashed in his eyes. Damn, look at me. Rhodes' eyes were full of anger, and without thinking about it, he picked up the brand new bazooka modified by Tony, aimed at the monitor lizard that was rushing towards King Kong, and suddenly pulled the trigger. Boom! A cannonball with a strange shape flew out of the barrel in an instant, and quickly flew towards the monitor lizard. As if feeling some danger, the giant lizard's forward figure stopped in an instant, and then leaped to the side, Wang Zhao Zhao, quickly. With just a light jump, relying on the huge amounts of its body, the monitor lizard covered a distance of more than 20 meters and successfully avoided the bombardment of the shells. Accompanied by the sound of huge amounts of explosions, the shell hit the mountainside directly behind the monitor lizard, blasting it out of a huge, deep pit with a radius of about 10 meters in an instant. Watching the movement behind him, the monitor lizard king let out another angry cry. Roar loudly. After receiving the order from the king, one of the skeleton monitor lizards that was in charge of besieging King Kong suddenly withdrew, then spared King Kong, and rushed towards Tony and the 2 behind him. Seeing this, King Kong roared, and was about to step forward to block it, but the next moment, he was blocked by the roaring monitor lizard king. Opening its big mouth full of sharp teeth, taking advantage of the moment King Kong was entangled by the other 2 monitor lizards, it bit down on King Kong's arm fiercely. Dow! The next moment, King Kong's painful roar sounded. Chapter 84, Terrifying Super Speed Regeneration. Click. Accompanied by a crisp sound, Chen Luo's face changed when he heard King Kong's sudden painful roar, and he immediately turned his head to look in the direction where King Kong was. Due to being entangled by the other 2 monitor lizards, King Kong had no time to dodge. His wrist was bitten by the opponent, and the wrist bone shattered on the spot. Under the severe pain, King Kong's ferociousness was also fully aroused. His eyes instantly turned red, his muscles swelled rapidly, he clenched his intact right fist and punched the opponent's head hard. Boom! Suffering from this heavy blow, the monitor lizard king subconsciously let go of his mouth in pain. His body shook a little, and he stopped attacking for a while. Good chance. Seeing this opportunity, a gleam flashed in Chen Luo's eyes. His legs exerted strength instantly, and his figure disappeared in place again. Under the full force of Chen Luo, a deep hole was instantly blasted into the ground where he was standing, and the whole person slammed into the opponent's body at supersonic speed. Facing Chen Luo's attack, because the opponent was still in a dizzy state, There was no time to dodge, and Chen Luo hit the vital point right away. In just a split second, Chen Luo bumped into the opponent's neck, and huge amounts of kinetic energy suddenly spread 317 on the opponent's body. After being hit by this impact, the giant beast couldn't help but let out another terrifying roar. 03L. Contrary to what Chen Luo thought, after receiving this heavy blow from him, the giant beast showed no signs of broken bones, but left a wound about 10 centimeters on its neck. If such a wound is placed on a human body, it is indeed considered a serious injury, but if it is placed on this giant beast with a body size of more than 50 meters, it is so insignificant. Seeing that his full blow could only cause this level of damage, Chen Luo's heart sank. There is no doubt that with his current attack, the damage he can cause is very limited, and what can really cause fatal damage to him is only Jin Gang who can do it. But right now King Kong is being entangled by the other two monitor lizards. If this situation continues, defeat is probably its only ending. And Chen Luo definitely can't just watch King Kong die, not to mention whether his choice can be completed after King Kong's death, but that they have established a certain friendship with King Kong in the past 2 months. If it weren't for King Kong's help, they don't know, Bishba, how long it would take them to collect enough materials. Therefore, due to emotion and reason, he couldn't just watch King Kong die in front of him like this. Thinking of this, Chen Luo's eyes instantly became firm. However, before he could make a move, as if enraged by King Kong's punch just now, following the roar of the Monitor Lizard King, the 2 monitor lizards that had been surrounding Chen Luo also joined in at the same time. The battle group that besieged King Kong. The 4 monitor lizards fought with King Kong, and combined with the attack of the King of Monitor Lizards, which was several times larger than King Kong was in danger all at once. Roar! Taking advantage of the moment when his legs and hands were bitten by the 4 monitor lizards, the Monitor Lizard King roared, opened his mouth, and bit down on King Kong's neck. Just when it was about to hit, in desperation, Chen Luo didn't even think about it, and his figure turned into a humanoid cannonball again and hit the opponent's head heavily. Affected by Chen Luo, the Monitor Lizard King's attack suddenly fell through. Seeing this scene, it suddenly let out another roar and swung its tail rapidly. When Chen Luo's body was still in midair, it faced Chen Luo directly and lashed out. Over. Boom. Under its huge force of hundreds of tons, the surrounding air seemed to be pumped, and there was a roar of huge amounts of roar, and Chen Luo, who had nowhere to rely on strength in midair, had no room to dodge, and was immediately struck by this. The tail is drawn straight, and it shoots out. His body turned into a human-shaped cannonball, and Chen Luo was instantly thrown backwards by the blow for hundreds of meters, and then he smashed a huge amount of pothole on the hill behind him, sending up smoke and dust all over the sky, completely knocking him down. Barry. Chen Luo. Seeing this scene, the 2 of Tony's eyes widened, and their eyes were instantly filled with bloodshot eyes. You bloody monsters! With red eyes, after killing the giant lizard charging towards them with one shot, the 2 turned their guns without hesitation and pulled the trigger towards one of the electric lizards surrounding King Kong. Although their hearts were already extremely angry after the previous scene, they also understood that with the flexibility of the Monitor Lizard King, it was very difficult to hit it. Therefore, perhaps it is best for them to liberate King Kong first. The best choice. And when King Kong saw Chen Luo being blown hundreds of meters away, his originally red eyes became even more blood red. Under extreme anger, he beat his chest frantically and roared towards the King of Monitor Lizards. Direction rushed. At this moment, King Kong seemed to have completely forgotten the injuries on his body, waved his fists, and crazily hit the opponent. The huge force of hundreds of tons exploded, and the opponent was defeated by King Kong for a while. At the same time, just when Tony were furious over Chen Luo's death, in the small hill not far away, with the smoke and dust dissipating in the sky, the figure of Chen Luo at the moment gradually appeared in the huge deep pit among them. Even with the blessing of the ability of the Man of Steel, Chen Luo was still severely injured in the face of the terrifying force of the Monitor Lizard King. All the bones in his body were shattered, his chest was severely collapsed, his arms were severely twisted, his legs were broken, and his body was stained red with a large amount of blood. It looked horrible. In the pothole, Chen Luo gasped for breath, looked up and looked around. Because the whole body was surrounded by potholes, the outside sunlight happened to be unable to shine in. Without the weakening of the sun, even though Chen Luo was severely injured at the moment, under the influence of another ability of his, the injuries all over his body began to recover at a speed visible to the naked eye. The bones quickly began to shift, and then healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. The large area of torn muscles also quickly returned to their original shape, the collapsed chest bulged again, the limbs regained consciousness, and the pale face quickly turned rosy. In 10 seconds, I fully recovered. Clenching his fists, feeling the resurgent power in his body, Chen Luo knew that the situation was urgent. Tony and the others might be in danger at any time, so he didn't stop at all. With a flash of stature, he rushed straight ahead again. Under his full speed, it took less than 2 seconds to reappear in the battlefield. Click! As soon as he returned to the battlefield, Chen Luo gave him a big gift. Taking advantage of the moment when King Kong was fighting with King Kong, he immediately rammed one of the monitor lizards again. Immediately, the unsuspecting skeleton monitor lizard was shot to the point by Chen Luo. Its neck was broken, and it fell to the ground and died on the spot. Seeing Chen Luo appearing in front of them intact, Tony and Tony, who were originally full of anger, froze for a moment, but were soon overwhelmed by excitement. Chen, you bastard is still alive. Chapter 85 Fierce Fighting. Hearing the excited shouts of Tony and the two, Chen Luo turned his head, smiled at the two, and then pointed to the skeleton monitor lizard beside him to signal to the two. Seeing Chen Luo's movements, the two reacted instantly, nodded in unison, aligned the weapons in the direction Chen Luo was pointing at, and pulled the trigger at the same time. The next moment, two specially made shells rushed out instantly and flew straight ahead, and right in front of the cannonball, there were two skeleton monitor lizards standing there. Facing the impending attack, before the two monsters could react, Chen Luo's attack followed closely behind, directly hitting their bodies. This time, Chen Luo did not specifically look for the opponent's weak point to attack, but instead aimed at the largest body part of the opponent's target, in order not to kill the opponent with one blow. It's to slow down the opponent's movements, so as to cover the attack of Tony and the other two. I have to say that Chen Luo's approach is also very effective. Under his interference, the two behemoths who had been impacted by the huge force stopped immediately, and before they stood still again, the two shells arrived as expected. Bang! There was a huge amount of explosion sound, and the shells hit the bodies of the two behemoths directly, instantly blasting a huge amount of blood hole in their bodies, and nearly half of the behemoth's body was instantly blown to pieces, no longer powerless to resist. Roar! Accompanied by a huge amount of mourning, after being so severely injured. No matter how tenacious the vitality of this monster is, it is difficult to escape the fate of death. With only half of his body left, he fell to the ground, twitched a few times unconsciously, and then gradually fell silent. Seeing their success with this blow, both of Tony cheered in unison, full of excitement in his heart. Now more than half of the 7 skeleton monitor lizards have died, and now only 3 skeleton monitor lizards are left alive. Compared with the desperate situation before, their situation is undoubtedly much better now, and the dawn of victory is already in sight. However, it is not long before they are happy. On the other side, the monitor lizard king who was fighting fiercely with King Kong seemed to feel some danger, and his performance became more and more crazy. He opened his big mouth full of sharp teeth and bit King Kong fiercely one bite after another. Under its terrifying bite force, although King Kong roared again and again, and his fists like small mountain bags kept falling on the giant beast's body, its body was already stained with blood from being bitten by the opponent in many places. Even a large piece of flesh and blood was bitten off, faintly revealing the white bones wrapped in flesh and blood. It is not surprising why King Kong behaved like this. After all, King Kong is still in his infancy, and his body size is not even half of his adult size. It is quite normal for the monitor lizard king who is at the peak of his strength to be defeated. What's more, its enemy is not only the king of giant lizards. Faced with the siege of other adult monitor lizards before, King Kong also left some injuries to some extent, and these injuries more or less affected its actions. The opponent of the king will not be seriously injured so quickly. Seeing the shocking wounds on King Kong's body, Tony and the two couldn't help being a little startled. When they were worried about King Kong's safety, Chen Luo's voice suddenly came from a distance. Quick, Tony, Rhodes, attack the other 2 monsters. After killing these 2 monsters, we will deal with that big guy. The two woke up as if they had just woken up from a dream, and immediately reacted, aiming in the direction of the remaining 2 monitor lizards again, and pulled the trigger. Seeing that Tony's attack had already been launched, Chen Luo's eyes flashed. He moved his feet, and disappeared in place in an instant. The exact same scenario as last time was staged again. Under Chen Luo's speed, the 2 monitor lizards had no time to dodge, and they were bumped head-on by Chen Luo. Under the impact of huge amounts of power, the 2 giant beasts paused, and before they had time to move, they were hit directly by 2 shells. Accompanied by 2 huge amounts of explosions, without any accident, the 2 giant beasts also died instantly, falling to the ground. Seeing this scene, Chen Luo breathed a sigh of relief, but he also knew that it was not the time to be happy, and the battle would only be truly over when the remaining monitor lizard king was resolved. Thinking of this, Chen Luo immediately turned his head and looked in the direction of the 2 giant beasts that were still fighting fiercely. It's just that when he saw King Kong's current appearance, his heart sank suddenly, his pupil shrank violently, and without even thinking about it, his figure turned into a sharp arrow and rushed towards the direction of the 2 giant beasts. Ask for flowers. At this moment, the 2 giant beasts had already fought to the most intense moment. The skull mask covering the head of the monitor lizard king was nearly half shattered, and the flexible tail behind him had also fallen to the ground weakly. Obviously, he had been beaten to death by King Kong. Break apart. One of the four limbs supporting the body was trampled into pieces by King Kong, and its movements became much slower than before. Judging by its appearance, it was obvious that it had also suffered serious injuries. But compared to it, King Kong's appearance at the moment is even more miserable. An arm hangs down weakly, blood is flowing, and on the majestic body, there are also several huge amounts of blood holes flowing blood. A large piece of flesh and blood was bitten off by the opponent and swallowed into the stomach, revealing the dense white bones wrapped in flesh and blood, which looked extremely hideous. In addition, on King Kong's neck, there was even a deep trace of being scratched by the opponent's sharp claws. Although the throat was not cut, it also caused huge amounts of damage to King Kong. A large amount of blood continued to flow from the wound on the neck. As the blood in the body continued to flow, King Kong's strength gradually became weaker. Seeing that the strength of King Kong's resistance gradually weakened, the Monitor Lizard King immediately let out a hearty roar, then opened his mouth wide and bit down on King Kong's neck mercilessly. Boom! Just when it was about to give King Kong a fatal blow, the next moment, Chen Luo's figure instantly appeared beside it and hit it straight on the head. Affected by Chen Luo's power, the giant beast's attack deviated, and it missed King Kong's side by a hair's breadth. Seeing this scene, King Kong immediately let out a roar, and without knowing where he got the strength, he used his only remaining arm to wrap around the Monitor Lizard's neck and tightly strangled it in his arms. 03L. Firmly controlling the opponent's body, preventing him from moving at all, King Kong turned his head to look in the direction of Tony and the two, roaring, "Quick, take this opportunity and launch an attack." When the two of them were having some doubts, the next moment, Chen Luo's roar came again and again. Chapter 86. The reward arrives. The dying King Kong. Hearing Chen Luo's words, the two were shocked. They can see the current situation very clearly. Now King Kong and the Monitor Lizard King are close together. If an attack is launched at this time, it is very likely to affect King Kong. Originally, King Kong's injuries were already very serious, and if there were any other accidents, it would be life-threatening. This was undoubtedly what the two of them did not want to see. Therefore, after hearing Chen Luo's words, both some hesitation up. Seeing this, Chen Luo naturally understood what they were worrying about, and immediately shouted loudly, "You go ahead and attack. King Kong's injuries, I have a way to heal them, but you have to get rid of this monster first." As soon as these words came out, the two of them instantly lifted their spirits, and their eyes instantly became firm. 773 stemmed from their trust in Chen Luo, and they did not doubt the credibility of his words. And now that King Kong's strength is getting weaker and weaker, the Monitor Lizard's struggle is also gradually increasing. It also became more and more nervous. If they didn't do it again, it would undoubtedly be a disaster for them to wait for the other party to break free. At the same time, King Kong's roar continued to reach the ears of the two, as if urging them to act quickly. This made them dare not neglect even more, and immediately aimed at the direction of King Kong, gritted their teeth, and pulled the trigger hard. Boom! Under King Kong's firm restraint, coupled with Chen's continuous attacks on him, although the damage caused each time was a bit insignificant, it also shared part of the pressure for King Kong, making it unable to break free from the restraint, and could only watch helplessly. Look at the two shells blasting towards this side. Roar! Accompanied by two huge amounts of explosions, the Monitor Lizard King suddenly uttered an extremely stern and huge wail. The sound shook the sky, and the huge amounts of sound waves spread around, making Chen Luo at the side dizzy from the shock. Slightly shakes the crystal. Facing Tony's special weapon, even the Monitor Lizard King, who was the overlord of the island, was also unable to resist. Two big holes were blasted into his body in an instant, and a large amount of blood gushed out like no money, instantly dyeing the entire ground red. Because the body was hit by the shell, most of its internal organs have been damaged at this moment. Even because of the tenacious vitality unique to giant beasts, it is still struggling and did not die immediately, but with the blood gushing out in large quantities, its struggling the strength is gradually weakening. Finally, after struggling for nearly 3 minutes, the overlord of the giant beast, which even King Kong was no match for, finally couldn't hold on and gradually stopped moving, and there was no sound. Seeing this scene, Tony and the two not far away were suddenly relieved. On Chen Luo's side, when he just relaxed and thought that the reward was about to arrive, he stood there waiting, but when he waited for a while, but still didn't get any response from the system, he suddenly reacted. Since the system hasn't given any hints yet, it means that there are skeleton Monitor Lizards still alive, but since the other party didn't follow their king to participate in the hunt, it must be presumably immature. If you think about it this way, then these juvenile Monitor Lizards are probably still staying in the cave where they usually live. They must be found quickly, otherwise. Thinking of this, Chen Luo subconsciously turned his head and glanced at King Kong, who was sitting on the ground and panting violently. The blood flow on his body was obviously much slower at this moment. Doomed to die. Seeing this scene, Chen Luo became more anxious and immediately started to act. With a flash of his figure, he rushed towards the direction of the small hill where the monitor lizards appeared. Under his full speed, soon, on the back of the hill, he successfully found the monitor lizard's yoke. Without hesitation, Chen Luo immediately dodged into the cave, and in less than a minute, Chen Luo successfully found the goal of his trip. Although with his current strength, it is still difficult to pose a threat to giant beasts like adult skeleton monitor lizards, but when facing these juveniles, there is no doubt that he has an absolute advantage. In less than half a minute, all the juveniles in the cave were killed by him immediately, and with the death of the last juvenile, the system's notification sound came as expected. Ding! Congratulations to the host for completing the selection. The reward is now issued. As soon as the words were finished, following Chen Luo's thought, the next moment, a blue flower that looked extremely magnificent appeared in front of his eyes. He stretched out his hand to receive the flower in his palm, knowing that the situation was urgent. So Chen Luo didn't have any thoughts of appreciating it, so he crumpled the flower in his hand, and then quickly stuffed it into his mouth. I didn't want to taste what it tasted like, so I swallowed it whole and swallowed it into my stomach. As the blue bana was successfully swallowed, Chen Luo only felt a warm current appearing in an instant and flowing all over his body, but it disappeared in the blink of an eye. Wanting to try the effect, Chen Luo's figure flashed, and when he reappeared, he had already appeared outside the cave, bathed in sunlight. Clenching his fists, feeling the constant power emerging from his body no longer had the feeling of weakness after being exposed to the sun. Chen Luo already understood that the only weakness about the Ghost King's body has been completely eliminated. After eliminating his own weaknesses, Chen Luo already had an idea of how to treat King Kong. According to common sense, with King Kong's current injuries, even if he has a strong vitality as a giant beast, he will definitely not escape the fate of death. But with Chen Luo here, it is different. If he transfers his own blood to King Kong, using the 3.7 assimilation ability, as long as King Kong is also transformed into the same Source Blood clan as him, using the terrifying resilience that the Source Blood clan naturally possesses, which is comparable to Wolverine, he will definitely be able to recover. The reason why Chen Luo didn't choose to transform into King Kong immediately was also because he still had considerable weaknesses. In addition, the blue bana flower was about to be obtained, so there was no need to take unnecessary risks to transform in advance. Otherwise, if King Kong really would weaken in the sun, with its size, I'm afraid it won't be able to hunt during the day. After eliminating his own weakness, Chen Luo didn't delay at all, and immediately set off towards the direction where King Kong was. And just when Chen Luo suddenly disappeared and went to hunt the surviving skeleton monitor lizards, seeing Chen Luo's disappearing figure, the two of Tony were very anxious. Chapter 87 Source Blood Clan A King Kong. What's going on? Where did Chen go? What should we do now? Even if Chen has a way to heal King Kong's injuries, if he doesn't come back now, King Kong won't be able to hold on anymore. The two of them stared at King Kong not far away without blinking, listening to the sound of the other party's breathing that gradually weakened, and its chest that gradually stopped rising and falling. Their expressions were extremely anxious. After nearly 2 months of getting along, Rhodes, who has the best relationship with King Kong, won't say much. Even Tony and Chen Luo have deep feelings for him. After all, although King Kong is huge in size, at its age, it is equivalent to a child in human society, and for so many years, because of the early death of its parents, there is no one who can communicate with it at ordinary times, so in terms of thinking it is also quite simple. Therefore, for King Kong, who has a very simple personality, the three of Chen Luo also love it very much. Even Tony, who wanted to study King Kong before, quietly changed his mind unconsciously and cherished him very much. It is precisely because of their deep feelings for King Kong that after seeing King Kong's signs of life began to weaken, the anxiety on their faces became more and more obvious. Damn it! What the hell is Chen doing? If he doesn't come again, if something happens to King Kong, I can't spare him. Just as the two were cursing, the next moment, as a black shadow flashed by, Chen Luo appeared in front of the two of them again. Chen, you guys are finally willing to show up? Hurry up, King Kong is about to die. Chen, you hurry up and save it. Looking at the anxious and concerned eyes of the two, Chen Luo turned his head, smiled confidently on his face, and said, "Don't worry, leave it to me. Before long, you will be able to see King Kong resurrected with full blood, appearing in front of you. It's here." Hearing these words, the two of them immediately lifted their spirits, and there was a glimmer of hope in their hearts. Under the expectant gaze of the two, Chen Luo slowly came in front of King Kong, jumped onto its shoulder, and came to the wound that was torn open by the monitor lizard. "Don't worry, King Kong, you won't die with me here." After touching the thick hair on the opponent's body, Chen Luo immediately stopped hesitation and started to move immediately. Stretching out the palm, the nails instantly swelled and became sharper, and then gently stroked the wrist with the sharp nails, and then, a large stream of blood gushed out from the wrist and flowed into King Kong's wound. As Chen Luo's blood poured into his body, at this time, the assimilation ability also began to play a role in an instant, and began to slowly but firmly transform King Kong's body. Although King Kong's body is gradually beginning to change, but because the body size is too huge, and the blood that Chen Luo flows into King Kong's body is like a drop in the bucket compared to King Kong's size. So at this moment King Kong, there are still no significant changes in the body. On the contrary, before anything happened to King Kong, Chen Luo had problems first. The reason is also very simple. His blood is not enough. After all, Chen Luo is also the height of a normal person. Even if he is a vampire, the blood in his body may be taller than a normal person, but for King Kong, it is so insignificant. Therefore, in order to completely transform King Kong, more blood is needed to replenish his physical strength, so that his body can produce more blood. Thinking of this, Chen Luo immediately turned his head and looked at the scattered corpses of skeleton monitor lizards below. His eyes flickered, and he felt a little pity in his heart. If he wanted to replenish his physical strength, the blood in the corpses of these giant beasts below was undoubtedly a good source of food. As long as he put it into the blood cup and transformed it, he could quickly replenish it. But in this way, his original plan will undoubtedly be ruined. Originally, he thought that after he successfully cured King Kong, he would use the ability of the blood cup to transform all the blood of these giant beasts below. He wanted to see if he could get some kind of ability after absorbing the transformed blood instead of simply consuming it as food, but now it seems that his idea is undoubtedly impossible to realize. Although it is a bit regretful that this idea cannot be realized, compared to saving King Kong, these are only trivial matters. At least in Chen Luo's heart, King Kong is much more important than the former. Therefore, in the next 10 hours, Chen Luo always went back and forth between blood transfusion and eating. After running dozens of times in succession, finally, after the blood of the last monitor lizard king was absorbed by Chen Luo, with the last blood transfusion, King Kong was finally transformed. As Chen Luo's blood gradually transforms King Kong into Yuan Blood Clan, the regeneration ability belonging to Yuan Blood Clan is also rapidly working in King Kong's body. Countless granulation grows wildly at the wound, and then gradually intertwines together, turning the bones below cover. The broken bones, muscles, and skin are all healing and growing quickly, and the huge and hideous wounds are gradually disappearing from invisible. Although the recovery speed is not as terrifying as that of Chen Luo, it only took less than a minute, and King Kong is full of blood again. Resurrection. Roar. Feeling the intact body, King Kong couldn't help but screamed up to the sky. His hands kept beating his chest, and the excitement was visible to the naked eye on his face. The two of Tony, who had been waiting for a long time, finally breathed a sigh of relief when they saw this, and they looked at each other with happiness in their eyes. Above King Kong's shoulder, Chen Luo's face was a little pale after hemorrhage, but under the ability of super speed regeneration, new blood was continuously produced, and he recovered in a short time 100. Looking at King Kong, who had regained his vitality, Chen Luo also had a gratified smile on his face. Then, after taking Tony and the two together, King Kong dragged the plane wreckage they had just found, turned around and walked towards the base. It took another 2 weeks, and the group returned to the base smoothly. At this moment, the open space in front of the cave has been covered with the wreckage they found from all over the place. Looking at the large amount of raw materials in front of him, Tony rubbed his hands with some excitement and said, "Okay, let's see mine next. Just give me 2 weeks, and I'll be able to make the tools that let us leave this island. By then, we can return to the human world again." Speaking of this, Tony seemed to have thought of something, turned his head to look in the direction of King Kong, and said confidently, "But King Kong, don't worry, when I go back, I will start making tools that can guarantee free passage. It won't be long before we come back to see you again." Roar. As if he understood what he said, King Kong gave a soft growl in response. Afterwards, Tony immediately rolled up his sleeves, greeted him, and threw himself into his work with full energy. But when the three of Chen Luo and Chen Luo started building escape tools in full swing, they were far away across the ocean. The sudden disappearance of the three of them caused quite a stir. Chapter 88 Angry Obadiah. Annoyed Blade. Across the ocean. Just a week after Chen Luo and his group went missing, all forces reacted one after another, and immediately sent people to start searching. However, after 3 weeks of continuous searching, they still failed to find any trace of Chen Luo and the three of them. Unable to hide it, it spread to all parties. As soon as this news came out, the whole world fell into a sensation. The first is Rhodes. As a young major with unlimited potential in the military, Rhodes has also received considerable attention in the military. Therefore, after learning the news of Rhodes' disappearance, the military also sent countless people to look for him. But because the three of them traveled using Tony's own private jet, and with the cover of the artificial intelligence JRVIS, the routes the three of them traveled were also very hidden, and there was no one for their destination. Know the answer. It is precisely because there are no relevant clues that after several weeks of continuous investigation, The military has not found any results, so they can only return home helplessly. At the same time, although they have not announced the death of Rhodes, a potential star, they have not yet announced his death. Apparently, there was no hope. Then there's Tony. As the chairman of the Sure Start Group with a market value of hundreds of billions, coupled with his playboy and super genius personality, this makes Tony very famous all over the world. So, after learning the news of Tony's disappearance, countless people were shocked. And because of the disappearance of Tony, the group's chief weapon designer, many shareholders have doubts about the future of Stark Group, and many people choose to sell the shares of Stark Group in their hands, causing the group's stock price to plummet. It made people panic. Los Angeles City, located in the bustling area of the city center, is on the top floor of a huge building with a height of more than 160 meters and an area of over 1,000 acres. Inside the CEO's office. You bastards! Have you been searching for so long and can't find any news from Tony? How the hell do you do things? Obadiah Stein, who was the president of Stark Group at the time, had a gloomy face and looked at a man in a suit who looked a bit capable in front of him full of anger, and said loudly, "Don't forget, I paid tens of millions of USD to hire you to work, and you gave me such an answer? If this is the case, isn't it a good money to earn?" After saying this, Stan's anger receded slightly, and his voice became much deeper. "Listen to me. I don't care how long it takes you to find out where Tony is, whether it's dead or alive. Do you understand?" "Understood, sir." The man subconsciously wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and hurriedly responded. Seeing this, Stan nodded in satisfaction, then waved his hand and said, "Okay, you go down first." Hearing this, the man turned around and left quickly as if he had received an amnesty. Looking at the back of the other party pushing the door and leaving, after the other party left, Stan didn't know what he thought of, and his face suddenly became cloudy. As the founder of the Stark Group, Howard Stark's friend, and also the uncle who watched Tony grow up, Stan is very clear about the abilities of these two people in research and development. It is no exaggeration to say that the abilities of Howard and Tony are the most outstanding existences Stan has ever seen, and it is precisely because of the extraordinary invention abilities of the father and son that the Stark Group has grown to its current scale. Although Howard passed away early, Stan believes that as long as there is a super genius like Tony, the Stark Group will be able to make further progress sooner or later, and eventually grow into a top giant company with a market value of trillions. And once that time comes, it will be the moment of his final harvest. Stan has always been very optimistic about the development of the Stark Group. He firmly believes that sooner or later, this company will become the top arms giant in this country and even in the entire world. Make this company your own. But he will only choose to do it when the Stark Group has really developed to that point. Obviously, now is not the moment he wants. It is precisely because of this that Stan, who wants to grow the Stark Group, is so concerned about Tony's disappearance, and even spends a lot of money to send people all over the world to start searching, in order to let the group's helm continue to lead. Group development. And when the company develops to the scale he imagined, at that time, I am afraid that he may be the first one who wants Tony to disappear. "Tony, where the hell are you?" In the huge and empty office, Stan's angry roar sounded. New York, Edgewood Building. In the office where Chen Luo was originally, Blade, who just went to North Bear Country for more than a month, is now sitting here again, flipping through the documents on the table, feeling very helpless. "Damn it, Chen Luo, where did you go?" Nearly a week after Chen Luo disappeared, the Chen Luo family finally realized that, like the military and the team sent by Stan, they also launched a search all over the world. However, after several weeks of searching, they still found nothing. At the same time, as the news of Chen Luo's disappearance spread, the underground world, which was originally frightened by Chen Luo and dared not act rashly, also surged undercurrents again. Knowing that the current New York base camp needs someone to sit in it, so no matter how reluctant Blade was, he still had to set off again in the end and go back to the headquarters. But even with Blade in charge, it can't stop the eager ambitions of various forces, especially the 12 clans who were driven out of New York by Chen Luo, and even the large and small vampire forces who fled in embarrassment. They are still unwilling to give up on this fat cake in New York, especially after learning that Chen Luo is missing. Therefore, in the following time, various forces continued to send people to New York to start testing, and the industries under Chen Luo's control were more or less harassed by these forces, until Blade personally dispatched and beheaded after killing hundreds of vampires. He calmed down. But Blade's actions still didn't frighten them. Although Blade was powerful, he wasn't as helpless as Chen Luo. Therefore, in order to find out how much strength the Chen Luo family has left, all parties actually made an unexpected move. In order not to damage the strength of their own family, but also to launch a shield against revenge from the Wang Nuozhou, Chen Luo family, after discussions, all parties finally decided to attract the European vampire forces who have been eyeing America against the Chen Luo family. As for their invitation, Amelia, the elder who is now in charge of the vampire forces in Europe, also readily agreed, and immediately sent elite troops to New York to fight Blade and others. With the entry of European vampire forces, The underground situation in New York has become more and more anxious. Seeing this intensified battle situation, even Blade, who is a soldier, is faintly unable to do what he wants. Although already a little tired, Blade led the crowd to resist the invasion of all forces tenaciously, and at the same time silently waited for Chen Luo's return. Even though it has been 2 months since Chen Luo disappeared, Blade believes that sooner or later, Chen Luo will appear in front of him again. Chen Luo, you bastard, I will settle accounts with you when you come back. Looking at the document in his hand, Blade cursed with a displeased face. Chapter 89 leaves Skull Island. Skull Island. In the blink of an eye, 2 weeks had passed since Chen Luo and his group returned to the base. This morning, in the dense forest outside the cave, accompanied by a huge amount of roar, overlooking from a high place, starting from the direction of the cave, and ending at the beach leading to the other side of the jungle. 10 somewhat unique runways. Rapid prototyping is in progress. In the middle of the dense forest, Chen Luo embraced a large tree about 10 meters long in his hands and waved it across the surroundings. Under his huge amounts of power, countless big trees around fell down one after another and were smashed into 2 pieces by Chen Luo. Keeping moving his hands, Chen Luo walked towards the beach outside one step at a time. As he walked, after the surrounding trees fell to the ground, the area suddenly became much more empty. Looks like the power has finally stopped growing. Feeling the strength in his body that had nearly doubled compared to the previous 2 weeks, Chen Luo couldn't help showing a satisfied smile. With a thought, he subconsciously called up the system panel to check. Host, Chen Luo. Race, Source Blood Clan. Strength, 100, 1 for a healthy adult male. Speed, 35. Spirit, 10. Physical, 70. Skills, Fighting Technique, High. Knife Technique, Master. Ability, Draw Blood, Super Speed Regeneration. Blood Manipulation 153 Control. Steel Body, Assimilation. Blood Source. Evaluation. As the source of the new race, you still have a long way to go. The power has doubled, and the physique has increased by 20 refining. It seems that the blood effect of those skeletal lizards is really extraordinary. Originally, he thought that absorbing the blood of those skeleton monitor lizards would not do him any good, but now it seems that he thought too simply. Although Chen Luo's physique is already huge amounts of different from other vampires after being integrated with the Ghost King's body, he still retains the characteristics of being a vampire, which is to grow by absorbing blood. Correspondingly, the higher the quality of blood absorbed, the more beneficial it is for the increase of the vampire's strength. If the growth effect of absorbing the blood of an ordinary person on the growth of a vampire may not be obvious, then the growth effect of absorbing the blood of the Tin-Song skeleton electric lizard is more than 100 times stronger. As the well-deserved overlord of the Skull Island Mountain, the blood of the Skull Monitor lizard is of great benefit to the growth of vampires. In addition, after the transformation of the blood cup, the essence of the blood is preserved to the greatest extent, so that Chen Luo's physique has been greatly strengthened again. Definitely, this kind of strengthening does not happen overnight, but has a process of absorption. Therefore, in these 2 weeks, Chen Luo's physical fitness has increased step by step and finally reached the current level. It wasn't until the day before, when Chen Luo's physical fitness showed no signs of increasing, that he realized that the improvement effect had come to an end. For Chen Luo, this is undoubtedly a pleasant surprise. Relying on the strength of the surge again, Chen Luo's efficiency in clearing the runway has also been further improved. So far, most of his progress has been completed. If there are no accidents, in a few hours, a 5-kilometer ultra-long runway leading to the beach outside will be completed. The reason why such a runway is built is naturally for the plane built by Tony. Although Tony has adopted a special design so that the plane can glide on the uneven ground, but facing the towering trees in front block, but there is still no way. Therefore, the only way to clear up the big trees blocking the road ahead is to leave enough acceleration space for the plane to reach the flight speed Tony expected. Soon, as the time came to the afternoon, the long runway was finally cleared, and at the same time, the work on Tony's side finally came to an end. On the huge open space outside the cave base, a plane with a very strange shape sits on it. The wide wings are distributed on both sides, and on the rear side of the wings, there are several devices that look like rocket launch nozzles. Compared with the wings, the body of the fuselage, looks very slender. The internal space is also a bit narrow, except for leaving enough space for 3 people and some living supplies, there is nothing else. In Tony's words, this is designed to increase the speed of the aircraft as much as possible, and discard all unnecessary parts so that they can ensure that they can cross this sea area as much as possible. And today is the day they officially set off. Looking at the plane in front of him, Tony looked at the two excitedly and said, "Well, everyone, are you all ready? We're leaving soon. Finally going back." Hearing this, Chen Luo couldn't help showing a trace of emotion on his face. Thinking of the fact that he hadn't contacted his family for several months, and Nisha who was far away in Beixiong, for a moment, his heart sank. "I can't help but feel a little more anxious." After carrying the materials onto the plane, The three of them came to King Kong and said their final farewell to King Kong. King Kong, we are leaving soon. But don't worry, we will come back to see you soon after we go back. Looking at King Kong in front of him, Rhodes said with a look of reluctance, Goodbye, big guy. When we meet next time, I'll bring you some food from our human world. Believe me, you'll fall in love with them. Tony blinked with a smile on his face. Chen Luo stepped forward and stroked King Kong's thick hair. King Kong lowered his head and looked at Chen Luo, as if he knew they were about to leave today, and a trace of reluctance flashed in his eyes. After Chen Luo's blood transformation, today's King Kong can be regarded as his first kinship, relying on the blood connection. King Kong is a little closer to Chen Luo, so it's not surprising to have such emotions. Roar. Although he was very reluctant, King Kong didn't do anything else. He just roared in a low voice, as if saying goodbye to the three of them. After quietly saying goodbye, the three of them walked towards the plane one by one and came to the cabin. Tony came to the console and said in a deep voice, We're leaving. After saying this, Tony lightly pressed a button on the console, and then, as the engine was running, huge flames burst out from the nozzles at the rear of the aircraft wing, driving the aircraft rapidly jump forward. Speeding all the way, on this long runway, the speed of the plane became faster and faster. Finally, the moment it was about to touch the sea surface, the plane gradually left the ground, bringing up a long tail flame, and disappeared in the blink of an eye. In the sky, roar. Seeing the disappearing figure of the plane in the sky, King Kong let out a soft growl and stayed in place for several hours before slowly turning around and walking away. Chapter 90 successfully escaped and caused a sensation in the world. Over the waters of Bermuda, among the pitch-black clouds, a plane with a strange shape pierced the air ahead and was flying towards the distance at high speed. After Tony's transformation, the plane's speed has reached about twice the speed of sound. At such a speed, the air in front of it seems to be smashed, and there are huge amounts of sonic booms and roars. At the current speed, if everything goes well, they will be able to jump out of this sea area in less than an hour. And as if the heavens are helping them, although there are still storms and turbulent currents passing through the Bermuda waters from time to time today, compared with the natural disaster they encountered last time, it has calmed down a lot. Provide them with good escape conditions. They didn't encounter too many twists and turns along the way. After nearly an hour of flight, they finally passed the border of Bermuda waters smoothly and officially came to the outside world. Great, we're finally out. Looking at the sea area shrouded in dark clouds behind them, Tony and Rhodes couldn't hold back their excitement any longer and immediately shouted loudly. Although Chen Luo on the side was not as excited as the two of them, he was also smiling and finally heaved a sigh of relief. However, before they could be happy for a long time, then, accompanied by a violent shaking, Tony couldn't stand upright and immediately fell to the ground. What's the situation? Is there another accident? Rhodes hurriedly raised his head and asked with a nervous expression on his face. Well, it's indeed a small problem. At this moment, Tony's voice sounded. Turning his head to look at the two, Tony said seriously, Before I built this plane, I knew that with the conditions on the island, the fuselage of the plane would definitely not last long. And now it can take us out of that sea area smoothly. It's already the limit. Now, it should be time for the fuselage to disintegrate. What? The plane fell apart? So what do we do? Rhodes' complexion changed, and he asked in disbelief. Don't worry, don't we still have Chen here? Tony didn't show any panic on his face. He turned to look at Chen Luo and said confidently, Chen, it's up to you from now on. With your strength, I believe we will be fine. Shaking his head helplessly, Chen Luo smiled bitterly. It seems that it is impossible to go home easily. Faced with such a situation, Chen Luo has no way to refuse. After all, he is the only one left with ability leading them to escape. Tony and the others are also ordinary people. If he doesn't take action, then Tony and the two will definitely not be spared in difficulty. Therefore, after instructing the two to bring food and water, Chen Luo immediately left and right, clamped the two in his arms, and then kicked forward. Under the action of huge amounts of force, the fuselage instantly cracked, and a huge piece the amounts of the baffle flew out and fell towards the sea. Ignoring the strong airflow blowing towards his face, looking at the direction of the baffle, Chen Luo moved his feet, leading Tony and the two of them to jump off. The 1,000-meter altitude was fleeting, and soon, when the three of them were less than 10 meters away from the sea, Chen Luo had sharp eyesight and quick hands, and immediately pushed the two of them upwards. He fell into the sea safely, and Chen Luo suddenly fell towards the depths of the sea under the huge amounts of impact force, and finally stopped the downward trend after falling straight for tens of meters. Under the protection of the steel body, Chen Luo didn't suffer any harm. After stabilizing his body, he quickly swam towards the top of the sea. After a while, he successfully joined Tony. Then Chen Luo took the two of them, and after spending more than 10 minutes, he successfully found the floating baffle nearby. After putting Tony and the two on it, Chen Luo pushed the baffle, just like when he fell into the sea before. swimming on the sea. But this time their luck was not as good as before. After drifting on the sea for nearly a week, the three of them didn't see any boat passing by the endless sea everywhere. To make matters worse, the food they brought had been eaten up 2 days ago. In addition, in order to prevent the two of Tony from being attacked by sea creatures, Chen Luo did not dare to leave Tony's side to look for food. 2 days later, both of Tony were lying on the baffle a little dizzy at the moment, not wanting to move at all. Looking at Chen Luo, who seemed to be okay beside him, Tony couldn't help but said with a little jealousy, "Damn, why is there nothing wrong with you, Chen? Don't vampires even need to eat?" Chen Luo didn't speak. He palmed his hand, and a blood cup appeared in his hand. Then he casually scooped a glass of seawater in the sea, and under the amazed gaze of the two, the sea in the cup was rapidly changing to blood-colored. Ask for flowers. After drinking the blood in the cup, Chen Luo recovered quickly from the exhausted physical strength, looked at the two with a smile and said, "Sorry, I have this thing here, so I don't have to worry about food." Seeing the scene just now, the two people on the side stared straight at him. After learning that the quilt in Chen Luo's hand can automatically produce blood, the envy on their faces could no longer be concealed, and Tony even lamented a little. "Road, I suddenly discovered, it seems that becoming a vampire is also very good. At least you don't have to worry about starving to death." Chen. Rhodes on the side looked at Chen Luo seriously and said, "I thought about it just now, but I actually think vampires are quite suitable for me. When do you think it's better to transform me? Let's arrange it as soon as possible. How about it?" 00. Cut. Hearing this, Tony couldn't help but rolled his eyes and was about to refute. At this moment, he glanced out of the corner of his eye, as if he had discovered something, rubbed his eyes in disbelief, and subconsciously muttered, "Chen, Rhodes, look over there. Is there a ship?" Both of them looked in the direction Tony was pointing at. Relying on their sharp eyesight, Chen Luo was the first to see the scene in the distance. A gleam of joy appeared on his face, and he said, "That's right. There really is a boat coming." Hearing this, Tony and the two immediately became excited, and they didn't know where the strength came from, so they stood up abruptly and urged, "Then what are you waiting for, Chen? Let's go there quickly. We will be rescued when we get on the boat." Needless to say, Chen Luo exerted all his strength and swam towards the distant ship at full speed. With Chen Luo's full strength, he arrived here in less than 10 minutes. Near the ship, after seeing the traces of Chen Luo and the three of them, everyone on the boat lowered the cables one after another and pulled the three of them up. After learning the identities of Chen Luo and the others, everyone on board was also overjoyed. The rewards for finding Chen Luo and his whereabouts have been known to the whole world in recent months. As long as they can find them, they can receive a reward worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Therefore, under the temptation of money, they immediately turned around and returned to the original road. Immediately afterwards, 1 day later, with the news that the three of Chen Luo had been rescued, the world was thrown into a shock instantly. Chapter 91 Return, Family Crisis. Hashtag 100 billionaires living on a deserted island have returned safely after a lapse of 3 months. Hashtag real version of Robinson Crusoe. A shocking journey of survival. Hashtag the remote and brainless Rhodes Brigade, the Asgardian of American citizens. According to the parties involved, the reason why they can survive on the desert island for such a long time is because of the protection of Major Rhodes. Hashtag according to reliable sources, the White House intends to confer the rank of Lieutenant Colonel on Major Rhodes. Hashtag. On the day after the three of them came back, there were overwhelming numbers of magazine journalists who came to their door after hearing the news. As a last resort, Tony could only urgently hold a press conference to express the remarks he had arranged long ago. After getting the desired news, everyone left contentedly. The next day, related reports spread all over the world, and for a while, the name of Rhodes, a toolman launched by Chen Luo and 750 Tony, instantly resounded throughout the world. Inside Tony's beach house, looking at the reports in the newspaper in his hand, Rhodes couldn't help showing bitterness. "Chen, Tony, is it really okay for me to say this? Put all the credit on me. It can't be helped." Tony on the sofa was holding his favorite hamburger in his hand, feeling the familiar taste, and couldn't help showing a satisfied smile on his face. "After all, I have to design a means of transportation that can travel freely in the waters of Bermuda, but I don't have time to argue with those people, so I can only trouble you." "It's the same here." Chen Luo, who was sitting next to Tony and also eating a hamburger, raised his head, looked at Rhodes and said, "You should also know about my situation, and you can't disclose it to other people casually, or it may cause embarrassment. Necessary panic. So my shadow of this matter should be as light as possible." Regarding Chen Luo's explanation, both of them nodded in understanding, not surprised. When they learned of Chen Luo's true identity, they were also taken aback. If it wasn't for a month of getting along, they would have known each other to a certain extent. After a period of experience, if they have cultivated enough trust, they will also stay away from creatures like vampires. It is precisely because of the possible impact of knowing Chen Luo's identity that, as Chen Luo's friends, they also chose to conceal it. After a while, Tony, who had eaten and drank enough, finally regained his energy again, stretched himself, then got up and walked towards the bedroom. Okay, I'm going to take a good rest for a few days, and when I regain my energy, I plan to design a means of transportation to and from Skull Island. I'm afraid I'm going to retreat for the next period of time. If you have nothing to do, don't bother me. I don't want to be distracted while I'm working. Looking at the back of Tony disappearing into the bedroom, Rhodes' eyes were full of anticipation. I don't know when Tony will be able to make it. If I wait for him to finish it, then I will be the first one to go. Chen Luo smiled, and then also slowly got up. In this case, then I'll leave first. There are still things waiting for me to deal with on the family side. It seems that I won't be able to meet with you in a short time. See you next time. After waving his hands casually and saying goodbye to the two, Chen Luo also strode towards the door. A few hours later, Chen Luo took a private jet and returned to New York smoothly. Then it took less than an hour to reach the top floor of the building, push the door open and enter. And here, Blade has been waiting for a long time. You bastard, you are finally willing to come back? Seeing Chen Luo for the first time, Blade immediately looked at him with displeasure and said, It seems that your life here is not very satisfactory during this period of time. Looking at the other party's expression, and the news that Chen Luo received after contacting the family for the first time after returning last night, Chen Luo simply teased after saying something to the other party. His face quickly became serious, and he asked, While I'm away, what's going on in New York? Tell me about it. I'd like to see who's after us. Hearing this, Blade's expression became serious, and he told Chen Luo about the current situation in New York City in a deep voice. It turned out that after hearing the news of Chen Luo's disappearance 2 months ago, all the vampire families, including the 12 clans, as well as the large and small vampire families who were expelled from New York by Chen Luo, all united to take advantage of Chen Luo's disappearance. Missing, when everyone in the family panicked, they suddenly launched an attack. Due to the suddenness of the incident, everyone had no time to react, and the many industries controlled by the family changed hands in an instant. Even the elite blood clan fighters, who are members of the family and whose strength is far superior to that of ordinary vampires, were also involved in the surprise attack here. Lost hundreds of people. You must know that Chen Luo's selection criteria have always been very strict. Even up to now, there are only about 1,000 vampires who can meet the conditions of the Chen Luo family, and now they have lost about 1/10 of them after a battle. Undoubtedly made Blade furious. Therefore, Blade, full of anger, led hundreds of elite teams, and suddenly launched an attack on the opponent. After killing hundreds of vampires by relying on strong personal force, the coalition finally realized how powerful he was, and chose to retreat one after another. But this is not over yet. Although their own forces have retreated, who stipulates that they cannot ask for foreign aid. As a war between vampires, even if they want to invite other foreign aid, they must be vampires. In addition to the vampires in this country, there are 2 other vampire kingdoms in the world, one of which is the Mosquitoes Empire that was destroyed by the Northern Bear Kingdom not long ago, and the other is the European Vampire Council, led by the vampire forces. Under the condition that Sui shared the power of the Chen Luo family, Amelia, who was the leader of the current European vampire power at the time and one of the 3 elders, also readily agreed to do so. As the most elite combat force under his command, the Daywalker came to help out. As the most well-deserved elite of European vampires, there is no doubt that the strength of the Daywalkers is 4.5. Whether it is fighting skills or firearms, they are absolutely top-notch. With all their strength, it is not difficult for them to fight 10 against 1. It was precisely because the opponent's combat power was so powerful that even though the number of Daywalkers sent was only 50, they still brought huge amounts of trouble to the Chen Luo family and caused the death of countless elite members of the family. In this short period of time, the number of casualties in the family has already exceeded half. If it continues like this, even if there is still Blade in charge here, facing the alliance of these forces, I am afraid that they will not be able to resist in the end, and can only end in destruction. After hearing such news, Chen Luo's face darkened instantly, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He lowered his head and thought for a moment, and soon, as if he thought of something, Chen Luo suddenly had an idea. Chapter 92. An undeniable proposal. I probably figured it out already. Chen Luo nodded slowly. A cold arc was drawn at the corner of his mouth, and the aura on his body became more and more threatening, giving people a heavy pressure. But now that I'm back, let me handle this matter. Hearing this, there was a smile on Blade's face, and he heaved a sigh of relief. As for Chen Luo's strength, Blade, who had fought side by side with him back then, could not be more clear about how terrifying it is. Even if the opponent has the upper hand in terms of strength, and there are elites like Daywalker, it is absolutely impossible. It's Chen Luo's opponent. It seems that in the next few days, New York will start to be uneasy again. Blade couldn't help but mourn silently for the coalition side. After several months of fighting, this period can be regarded as the most peaceful time in New York. Due to the heavy losses, the Chen Luo family hid in the dark and silently licked their wounds, while the coalition forces were secretly accumulating strength, planning to, in one go, completely wiped out the forces created by Chen Luo. However, at such a critical juncture, something happened that neither of the two sides expected. That is, Chen Luo, who had been missing for several months, finally got news and returned safely. As soon as the news came out, both sides reacted differently. Chen Luo's side was ecstatic, cheering for Chen Luo's return. The reason why most of them chose to join the Chen Luo family at the beginning was that Chen Luo's personal prestige must occupy a considerable proportion. After all, the title of butcher is not just for fun. It is the title that Chen Luo killed himself. So far, it is only a rough estimate, and the number of vampires who died in Chen Luo's hands is 4,000 to 5,000. Such a number accounted for nearly half of the number of vampires in New York in its heyday, which was equivalent to the number of all vampires in one of the 12 clans. Even Blade, who has been hunting vampires since he was a child, the number of vampires he hunts is far inferior to that of Chen Luo. It is no exaggeration to say that the name of Chen Luo's butcher is not an exaggeration, even if it is stained with blood. As the biggest executioner in the history of vampires, Chen Luo's name is definitely worthy of the name among the group of vampires. Only one. It is precisely because they understand how much weight the name Chen Luo contains. So even though Chen Luo suffered heavy losses, their confidence has not weakened at all, and they are gearing up secretly, expecting Chen Luo to lead them to counterattack back. Contrary to Chen Luo's side, after hearing the news of Chen Luo's return, the momentum of the coalition forces was hit hard. Fear appeared on the faces of the elite coalition forces who were not afraid of death. All the high-level officials who had clamored to annihilate the Chen Luo family in one fell swoop also fell silent, and their faces were terribly solemn. In addition to being frustrated, what's more, like those countless small and medium vampire forces who came here with the purpose of looting, as long as they think of Chen Luo's deeds back then, they can't help but tremble a little. Driven by fear, there are still many vampires who choose to escape. Although these escaped vampires were discovered by the coalition forces at the first time, and then quickly dealt with them, the impact of this incident was not so easy to calm down. Inside the coalition forces, countless rumors spread in private, which had a great impact on the morale of the coalition forces. One hit dealt a heavy blow. Seeing such a situation, the high-level leaders of all parties were secretly frightened by Chen Luo's power, but at the same time, they also became extremely afraid of Chen Luo. As for the reaction of the coalition forces, Blade had already expected it. But at this moment, he seemed to have thought of something suddenly, turned his head to look at Chen Luo uncertainly, and said, "Although those guys will not be your opponents, they are not fools after all. After knowing that you are back, they should not let you come to your door, right? I think they have already escaped by now, not surprising either." Hearing this, Chen Luo shook his head and said with a smile, "Don't worry, they won't. After all, they have eaten most of our property, which is a huge wealth worth tens of billions. Will they give up so easily? You think too highly of them." After a pause, Chen Luo continued, "I think next, they will definitely launch an operation against me. Maybe they will send an elite team to assassinate me, not necessarily, but I don't think it's that troublesome. I have a proposal that they can't refuse. I believe they will be moved after hearing my proposal." Hearing this, Blade frowned slightly and asked in doubt, "Proposal?" "That's right." A half-smile appeared on Chen Luo's face, and he said slowly, "If I say, let them designate a time and place, and then I come to the door alone to challenge, do you think they will refuse this proposal?" "Alone? Are you serious?" Blade's face changed slightly, and he looked at Chen Luo in disbelief. "You don't know how many people there are in the coalition army? That's tens of thousands. Are you sure you can deal with it?" Under the lure of this huge and fat cake in New York, all major forces have also sent their elites to form a coalition army and march towards New York together. Not to mention that the physical fitness of these elites is several times that of ordinary people, and the weapons they carry are enough to capture a small country. Such strength, no matter where it is placed in any corner of the world, must not be underestimated. If it weren't for the 417th Coalition and the Chen Luo family tacitly restraining the scope of the war and not attacking ordinary people, otherwise the turmoil they created would have been strongly suppressed at the national level. But because this is the reason of the vampires' internal strife, coupled with the help of high-level officials who have close ties with all vampire forces to help cover it up, they have tolerated their fighting until now. Such a huge force advantage, coupled with the various equipment they carried. If they confronted them head-on, even if this person was Chen Luo, he would not believe that something would happen. Facing Blade's doubt, Chen Luo smiled with confidence on his face. "Brad, you may not understand that now. When a person's strength reaches a certain level, no matter how many people there are, to me, it's just a number. Don't worry, I will not lose this war." Speaking of this, Chen Luo suddenly thought of something, looked towards Blade with great interest, and said, "By the way, Brad, I have a method for you to quickly increase your strength. Are you interested?" "Huh?" Blade was taken aback for a moment, His eyes couldn't stop being curious. While Chen Luo and Chen Luo were speaking, a fierce debate was going on within the coalition forces. Chapter 93 Resolution. Chen Luo's Letter of War. What? Retreat? No, I don't agree. We took these industries with great difficulty. How can we withdraw immediately? If we go back like this, who will be responsible for our losses during this period? Enough. Are you blinded by money? Don't you know how terrible Chen Luo is? I don't want to die here. What if Chen Luo comes back? We have tens of thousands of people. Could he still kill us all? Do you really think he is a god? In a luxurious villa in the city center, the heads of the major forces gathered here one after another and began to discuss the next step. Since the news of Chen Luo's return came, the meeting has lasted for nearly 2 days. However, the number of people who support staying and those who think they should retreat and flee is evenly divided, and each insists on their opinions. Even after arguing for such a long time, there was no definite answer in the end. Those who supported the retreat believed that the threat Chen Luo posed to them was too great. If Chen Luo made a move, judging from the past deeds of the other party, they would definitely suffer heavy losses, and even their own lives would be in danger. Therefore, for the sake of their own lives, they did not want to be enemies with Chen Luo. If Chen Luo really disappeared, it would be fine. Without Chen Luo's shock, they would definitely not let go of this big cake in New York. But now that Chen Luo is back, this delicious cake has become incomparable to them. Now it's hot, so naturally I don't want to touch it. The idea of the side that supports staying is also very simple. Now that most of the property under the Chen Luo family has been occupied by them, it is a huge wealth worth nearly 100 billion. How can they be willing to give up so easily? Although Chen Luo's title of butcher made them very afraid, but now the coalition army formed by their various families has tens of thousands of troops. With this huge amounts of numbers, no matter how powerful Chen Luo is, they don't believe it. How can you take yourself? However, even the one who wants to stay just wants to keep the property he has obtained now. The idea of completely defeating the Chen Luo family has long since disappeared. Even though their side has an absolute superiority in military strength, they still dare not make further moves against Chen Luo's intimidation. Chen Luo's deterrent power can be seen from this. Just as the two sides were arguing, someone suddenly thought of something, turned his gaze to the side, and the representative of the European vampire force, who had not spoken from the beginning, Cleven, had a flash of light in his eyes, and said, "Since none of us can convince the other party, we might as well listen to what Craven has to say. Maybe it can bring us some unexpected gains." As soon as these words came out, everyone's eyes fell on Cleven at the side in unison, quietly waiting for his answer. During this period of time, they have also learned about the power of these vampires from Europe. Even if there are only 50 soldiers, any one of them is far superior to most of them. Is the well-deserved top combat power of the coalition forces. This kind of strength can naturally attract enough attention from all parties. Facing the gazes of the crowd, Craven rolled his eyes and said with a smile on his face, "About the butcher's information, I think everyone should be very clear. Judging from the other party's behavior, I would like to ask you, even if we choose to retreat, will the other party really let us go? Everyone, don't forget how much loss we have caused the other party's family during this period of time. Do you really think that butcher will let it go like this?" As soon as these words came out, everyone was silent. They definitely don't understand Chen Luo, and naturally understand that with the other party's domineering style, facing them, the chief culprit who caused heavy casualties to their family, naturally it is impossible to let them go easily. Even if they choose to retreat, they may face the pursuit of the other party in the future, and by then, they may be doomed. After Craven's reminder, everyone finally realized the threat they might face in the future. Thinking of this, everyone's hearts trembled. However, before Craven finished speaking, he continued, "Since everyone understands how dangerous the other party is, why don't we take advantage of our superiority and kill the other party in one fell swoop? If we can directly get rid of that butcher, then do we still have to worry about any danger we will face in the future? And if the other party is really eliminated by us, then the remaining property of the other party will also belong to us. In this New York, no one will be able to threaten us anymore. If we choose to retreat today and wait for the coalition forces to disband at that time, then the other party will come to our door again. Then I don't need to say more about what will happen to you all." After some analysis by Cleven, everyone finally realized suddenly and reacted one after another. "Looks like that butcher, we have to get rid of it." "That's right. It wouldn't be a good thing for us to keep him alive." "Then what are you waiting for? Let's fight the opponent directly. With our current strength, as long as we are willing to pay enough, we will definitely be able to completely defeat the opponent. No matter what price you pay, you must get rid of Chen Luo." Everyone's opinions instantly became unprecedentedly unanimous. Seeing this scene, Craven smiled even more, and a look of complacency flashed across the hall in his eyes. And just after everyone reached an agreement, the next moment, there was a knock on the door, and then, a message from Chen Luo spread to everyone's ears in an instant. After listening to what Chen Luo said, everyone was stunned. and then unstoppable anger rose in their hearts, and they laughed coldly and said, "It seems that this butcher really doesn't care about us. He wants to challenge us alone? Where did he get the courage? There is no limit to the number of people, and the location is not limited. Hee, what a brave man. Since he took the initiative to come to seek death, then we will fulfill him. I don't believe that he alone can fight against tens of thousands of us." Originally, they had already decided to get rid of Chen Luo, but now Chen Luo came to their door on their own initiative. They would definitely not refuse such a good thing, and after a short discussion, they immediately got an answer. 3 days later, in the ghost town on the outskirts, they waited for Chen Luo to drive him. On the other side, after receiving the message from the other party, Chen Luo showed a slight smile on his face, and then agreed without any hesitation. In a blink of an eye, as time passed day by day, finally, the final decisive battle was coming. Chapter 94: The Arrival of Chen Luo, the Powerful Daywalker. 3 days later, on the outskirts of the west, in a deserted small town, inside a tavern that looks a bit old, the heads of all major forces gathered here one after another, quietly waiting for the arrival of the true master. "Do you think the butcher will come?" someone asked, looking at the crowd with some uncertainty. "It should come. After all, he proposed it on his own initiative, so is it possible that he will retreat in the face of battle? Oh, I don't think he would dare to come. He is not a fool. He should know that with his strength, it is absolutely impossible to fight against tens of thousands of us. He is probably still shivering somewhere." As soon as this remark came out, people burst into laughter. It is not surprising that they have such self-confidence. They have already made a decision since they received Chen Luo's letter of challenge 3 days ago. That is to temporarily abandon the industry in New York, concentrate all forces first, kill Chen Luo, and then turn to New York. As long as Chen Luo dies, it is absolutely impossible for the remaining forces of the Chen Luo family to fight against them. At that time, it only takes a little time to defeat the remaining forces of the Chen Luo family, and the underground forces in New York will be destroyed. It's all in their hands. When 400 thought that he would be able to return to New York in the near future, the heads of the major forces who had been forcefully expelled from New York by Chen Luo couldn't hide their excitement, and their expressions were full of excitement. At this time, someone suddenly thought of something and asked hesitantly, "Then what should we do if the other party doesn't come here as agreed?" Hearing this, the smiles on everyone's faces stagnated, and they all fell silent. However, before they could come up with anything, Craven on the side already had the answer in his heart. "Wouldn't that be better?" There was an inexplicable smile on his face, and he slowly said, "This duel was proposed by the butcher himself. If he doesn't abide by the agreement, as long as we spread the news go out, what do you think others will think of him?" Hearing this, everyone's eyes lit up and they immediately reacted. If Chen Luo sees that they are powerful and chooses to retreat, as long as the news spreads that he avoids fighting, then Chen Luo's reputation will be greatly damaged, his reputation will also be greatly reduced, and his reputation in the family will also be affected. Huge impact, and may even have the risk of causing the family to fall apart. BJCF, it would be fine if he didn't initiate the duel this time. In this way, even if Chen Luo chooses to retreat from others, he will express his understanding. After all, he has to face tens of thousands of people, and they are all vampires, elite fighters. Such a force is enough to conquer a small country. Is there any manpower that can compete? However, this duel was proposed by Chen Luo himself, so if he chooses to avoid the battle, the concept is different from the former one. The Chen Luo family, whose strength has been greatly weakened, is even worse. Coupled with the pressure from the outside allied forces, the family may be disbanded at any time. Thinking of this possibility, everyone couldn't help but smile knowingly. I think that guy probably doesn't dare to come, but that's good too. Presumably, when today's news spreads, the outside world will have a new view of this butcher. I don't think there is anything to be afraid of this butcher. Even if he dares to come over with so many of us, I don't believe he can still resist. While everyone was talking and laughing, suddenly, a slightly startled voice came from outside the door. "It's not good, leaders, that butcher. He's here." Hearing this, everyone's expressions changed instantly, and they couldn't help being a little surprised in their eyes. "I didn't expect this butcher to dare to come here. He really has courage. Since he came to seek death by himself, don't blame us. Everyone, let us send this butcher one last time." With that said, everyone got up together and walked towards the entrance of the town. Not long after, when everyone came to the entrance, Chen Luo's figure not far from the entrance gradually appeared. Looking at the people standing at the entrance, Chen Luo stopped slowly and said calmly, "Here I come. So, are you ready to hit the road?" Hearing this, everyone laughed angrily. "Interesting. Since you are not afraid of death, then go ahead. I want to see how you beat all of us. I didn't expect you to come here alone. I have to say, you are very brave. Then, as a reward for your courage, we will give you a happy death." After all, everyone immediately planned to do it. However, at this moment, Craven suddenly reached out and interrupted them. Staring at Chen Luo in front of him without blinking, Craven's eyes flashed, and he said with interest, "Everyone, don't rush to do it. I have been famous for the name of this butcher for a long time. It's hard to see each other today, so please let me try it first. I'd like to see how this butcher will perform compared to the Daywalker." Craven was very aware of Chen Luo's name, even in Europe, but like most people who had never seen Chen Luo's strength with his own eyes, he still had some doubts about Chen Luo's rumored deeds. As the top combat force under the European Vampire Council, Daywalker is the strongest except for the three elders. In addition to having several times the physical fitness of ordinary vampires, he has also reached the level of proficiency in fighting and firearms. Such an elite force was formed by the council at a huge amount of cost. For hundreds of years, the total number of Daywalkers was only about 300 people, but only relying on the number of about 300 people, the council has ruled the vampire forces in Europe for 800 years, which shows its strength. Now, in order to take a share of the city of New York, Craven has the right to mobilize 50 Daywalkers to New York with the consent of Amelia, one of the three elders. Although the number of people is small, relying on the powerful combat power of the Daywalkers, Craven can be said to have done his best in the battle with the Chen Luo family. He has occupied about 1/10 of the property owned by the Chen Luo family alone. This is a huge wealth worth tens of billions. Only 50 people can achieve such a result, which shows the strength of the Daywalker. It is precisely because of his confidence in the strength of the Daywalker that Craven has the confidence to confront Chen Luo head-on. If, as he imagined, Chen Luo was killed by the Daywalker in this battle, then relying on the record of killing Chen Luo, how much benefit can be gained from it is even more unknown. Thinking of this, Craven couldn't help but get even hotter. Chapter 95 Instant Kill scared Craven. After hearing what Craven said, the heads of the other major forces looked at each other. An inexplicable gleam flashed in their eyes, and then nodded tacitly, agreeing. "Since you have such confidence, Craven, it seems that we have no reason to refuse." "That's right. We all know the strength of the Daywalkers. Each of them is a well-deserved top level. I believe that if it is them, they will definitely be able to win. Then it's up to you." "That's definitely." Facing everyone's flattery, Craven nodded definitely and said to himself, "Don't worry, leave it to me. I believe that with the strength of the Daywalker, even if the opponent is a legendary butcher, he can definitely win." After finishing speaking, Craven turned his head and looked behind him. Behind him, 50 Daywalkers stood one by one. They were lined up in several rows, wearing black leather windbreakers. Their bodies were vigorous, and their expressions were very solemn, like dozens of quiet statues. Go and take his head off for me, and prove to me your history." Craven's deep voice sounded. Hearing this, all the Daywalkers behind him walked towards Chen Luo without saying a word. Looking forward closely, Craven's face was full of smiles, and his expression was relaxed, obviously having absolute confidence in the strength of the Daywalker. It is no wonder that he has such self-confidence. After all, in his long life, the strongest people he has come into contact with are the level of the three elders, but no matter how strong the three elders are, in his opinion, there may be more than 50 Daywalkers joining forces, and if the three elders are like this, Chen Luo naturally needless to say. Even though he has heard about Chen Luo's various deeds before, these deeds seem to him like a fantasy. He can accept 1 against 10, or even 1 against 100, but 1 against 1,000? This is his. In any case, it is unacceptable. In his opinion, no matter how strong Chen Luo is, he should be limited in strength and will not exceed the level of the three elders at most. Therefore, he believes that the opponent will never be able to kill a Daywalker who can successfully besiege at the elder level. There is no chance of winning. As for the thoughts in Craven's mind at the moment, the other people around him also had some guesses. Although everyone's faces were very calm, they all sneered and sneered at it. After all, they had personally experienced Chen Luo's record at the beginning. Such strength is absolutely inhuman level. No matter how strong the Daywalker is, if he faces that fierce god, he may not be able to escape death. Although they had already anticipated the fate of the Daywalkers in their hearts, they did not open their mouths to remind each other of their thoughts. On the contrary, at this moment, everyone was watching the front with the idea of watching a good show, quietly waiting for the final result. Seeing the Daywalkers walking towards him in front of him, Chen Luo smiled with interest and said softly, "All right, since you all came here to die, I'll satisfy you. Just let me see, what kind of strength does the Daywalker have?" Looking at Chen Luo's relaxed expression, a kind of Daywalker's eyes flashed coldly in front of him, and then they all attacked at the same time. Bang, bang, bang. Without further ado, Chi pointed his gun at Chen Luo and immediately pulled the trigger. There was a violent gunshot, and with the bursts of flames spewing out from the muzzle, hundreds of bullets shining purple flew out of the barrel and then broke through the air in front of them and rushed towards Dr. Chen Luo. This is a specially made ultraviolet bullet to deal with vampires. The bullet contains a large amount of ultraviolet rays. As long as it hits the target successfully, The ultraviolet rays contained in it will spread rapidly and destroy the vampire's body, causing serious injury or even death to the target. Even if they survive by luck, under the action of ultraviolet rays, the vampire's healing ability will be greatly weakened, which will seriously affect its actions. In the end, it can only be slaughtered like fish on a chopping board. Facing the opponent's attack, Chen Luo drew a curve at the corner of his mouth, and then under the surprised eyes of everyone, he moved his feet, and his figure turned into an afterimage and quickly disappeared in front of everyone. Seeing that the blow that was determined to win was missed, there was a wave of fluctuation on the faces of the people who were originally calm. They were obviously very surprised by the speed Chen Luo showed, but they are also worthy of being elites who have undergone many years of training. After seeing that they missed a hit, they immediately surrounded each other tightly in a cylindrical shape, back to back, and looked around with a look of wariness. Asking for flowers? 0. Good reaction. Chen Luo's voice suddenly sounded in the air. Due to the high-speed movement all the time, Chen Luo's voice sounded a little fuzzy, but a smile could still be heard from it. But I don't want to play with you anymore. This game, it's time to end. As soon as the voice fell, the next moment, a long black afterimage emerged from midair, and then rushed towards the camp composed of 10 dead walkers in front of him. A somewhat glaring white light lit up in front of everyone's eyes, and then circled around a group of deathwalkers, finally forming a silver-white ring. After the light lasted for nearly a second in the air, it finally gradually dissipated. 0. And as the light dissipated, the next moment, Chen Luo's figure reappeared, standing firmly in front of everyone. Gloves had already been put on his hands at some point, and the knuckles were surrounded by circles of thin, silver-white threads. This was a weapon he specially asked Mr. Whistler to make some time ago. The whole body of this thin metal wire is made of a special alloy, which not only has super hardness, but also takes into account a certain degree of flexibility. The surface of the thin wire is coated with a silver coating, which is extremely strong for vampires. Coupled with Chen Luo's inhuman speed and strength, this special weapon suddenly exploded with extremely astonishing and terrifying lethality. As it is now, seeing Chen Luo appearing in front of his eyes again, but before the crowd could make any movement, the next moment, a sharp pain suddenly appeared in the neck, and then, a tiny line of blood quietly emerged from the neck of the crowd. Traces of blood began to ooze slowly. The eyes couldn't stop showing panic. In the face of death, even the elite fighters with the title of Daywalker couldn't restrain the fear in their hearts. They opened their mouths slightly and were about to ask for help, but it was already too late. Poof! One after another, heads broke from the necks and fell to the ground one after another. Under Craven's horrified gaze, his proud Daywalker was held in Chen Luo's hands for less than 10 seconds before being crushed. Chen Luo counts all the slaughter scarves. Chapter 96 Detonation. Chen Luo injured. No. Impossible. This must be an illusion. Craven's already pale face instantly turned pale, and his gaze towards Chen Luo couldn't help but began to tremble. Looking at the head that fell to the ground under his feet, an uncontrollable fear suddenly came from him. The bottom of his heart began to emerge. In just a few seconds, in such a short period of time, the Daywalker, who is regarded as the top combat power in the whole of Europe, is like a baby who has just learned to walk, without the slightest resistance, and was instantly crushed by Chen Luo. Spike. With such strength, in his opinion, even the 3 elders who are the top vampires in Europe are far behind, and even if the 3 elders join forces with Song Fear, it is impossible to round Chen Luo's opponent. Seeing Chen Luo, who was slowly walking towards him, Craven's feet softened and he knelt down in front of Chen Luo, the 610 office. Don't come here. You don't come here. Coming in front of the opponent, Chen Luo frowned, seeing his frightened face, and didn't directly choose to kill the opponent. He stunned him with a hand knife, and then threw him behind him. The opponent is still useful to him, so Chen Luo has no plans to kill him yet. After all, his next goal is Europe, and it would be good to know some relevant information in advance. After dealing with the opponent, Chen Luo walked forward slowly with strides. On the other hand, even though it had been expected that this battle would end in Chen Luo's victory, after seeing that the other party easily eliminated those Daywalkers who were among the best in their family, everyone couldn't help it. My heart skipped a beat, and I frowned. Okay, the warm-up activities are over. Now it's your turn. After a pause, the murderous intent in Chen Luo's eyes finally no longer concealed. A horrible aura like a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood came out through his body, spreading instantly, and the surrounding air seemed to be frozen. Breathing also became faintly difficult. Now, let me send you on your way. As soon as the words fell, at this moment, the people in front of Chen Luo finally couldn't bear the pressure and shouted with crazy faces. Quick, hurry up, get rid of him. After saying this, the people in charge of the major families immediately turned and retreated without turning their heads. At the same time, at Chen Luo's feet, there was a crisp sound, followed by a violent explosion sounded. It turned out that after the coalition forces agreed to Chen Luo's challenge, although they didn't think that facing their tens of thousands of troops, the other side had any chance of winning, they still took some corresponding countermeasures just to be on the safe side. It's as if the ground around this small town has long been covered by dense remote-controlled mines. In this way, no matter which entrance Chen Luo enters from, they can give each other a big gift. Although they encountered a little twists and turns before this, the failure of Craven's side did not affect them. So when Chen Luo approached, the gift they had prepared for a long time arrived as scheduled. Bang! Accompanied by the violent explosion, Chen Luo's position was instantly covered by a thick layer of sand and dust, and at the same time, a group of huge amounts of flames loomed in the sand and dust. Like dominoes, as the first explosion sounded, the landmines walking around were also affected one after another, and exploded, and one after another explosion sounded within a radius of hundreds of meters. All of them were covered by violent flames and covered in dust. At the same time, the coalition forces did not intend to stop the attack. Accompanied by dense explosions, countless vampire elites raised their guns, and the ultraviolet bullets shot toward Chen Luo's direction like dense raindrops. In an instant, thick from time to time, layers of dazzling purple light appeared in the sand and dust, illuminating the nearby night sky as if it were daytime. The crowd unleashed their firepower frantically. At this moment, the high-level people who had already run to the back of the crowd finally regained their composure. Looking at the scene in the distance, they couldn't help but sneer and say, "Look, in the face of this great gift from us, can that Chen Luo survive? Humph, then you think too highly of him." One person said with disdain, "So what if he is fast? I don't believe that he can survive such a large-scale explosion unscathed. Even if it's impossible to do it, even if your body is made of steel, even if he can escape the dense explosion, how can he escape the ultraviolet bullets behind? Even if only a small part can hit, with the lethality of ultraviolet rays on vampires, I don't believe what will happen to him nor." That's right. At this time, another person also echoed. From beginning to end, Blade is the only one who can be immune to sunlight. Unless Chen Luo is also a Daywalker, there is absolutely no way he will be immune. Only a few people knew of Chen Luo's experience in the North Bear before, and they have all joined Chen Luo's command now, so it is even more impossible to pass on the news that Chen Luo is also immune to sunlight. So these people have not been clear until now. This so-called ultraviolet bullet is useless to him. However, although the bullets had no effect on Chen Luo, the mines they specially prepared for Chen Luo still caused a certain amount of damage to Chen Luo. With Chen Luo's current physique, after another wave of strengthening on Skull Island, it has been strengthened again. Although the damage to him from weapons such as mines has also been reduced, it is still not completely immune. Therefore, when the smoke cleared and Chen Luo's figure reappeared in front of everyone, his situation looked rather miserable at this moment. Most of the clothes on his body have been blown to pieces, and they are draped over Chen Luo's body like rags, revealing the tall and strong figure hidden in it, just like in ancient Greek mythology, and on his perfect body. At this moment the exposed injuries are somewhat shocking. One arm hangs down weakly at 5.4. A large piece of flesh and blood has been lost in the palm and forearm, exposing thick white bones, and in his waist, back, and 2 feet that stepped on the ground. Most of the flesh and blood have dissipated, and the skin it was scorched black by the explosion just now, and it looked extremely miserable. Looking at Chen Luo's shaky body, although everyone was still shocked that he survived the horrible explosion just now, Chen Luo has been severely injured and has lost the threat to them. Therefore, everyone's originally tense hearts finally gradually relaxed. However, before they could relax for a long time, the next moment, when everyone saw Chen Luo's abnormal state at the moment, their pupils constricted instantly, their bodies froze, and their faces were full of disbelief. How is this possible? Chapter 97. The Invincible Chen Luo, the Butcher reappears. Under everyone's shocking gaze, Chen Luo's seemingly serious injury was recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. Numerous granulation sprouts emerged from the wound, intertwined rapidly, and then formed a brand new muscle tissue, covering the bones in the body again. As Chen Luo moved forward step by step, within less than 10 steps, his scarred body had already healed again. The miserable appearance before had disappeared without a trace. Looking at Chen Luo's perfect body, which was as if cut by a knife, everyone present was overwhelmed by huge amounts of fear. Even if he suffered an injury that would be fatal to an ordinary person, for Chen Luo, who possesses super speed regeneration ability, this injury is completely insignificant, and it only took a few seconds. It was completely restored to its original state, and there was no trace of it anymore. It's a monster. Looking at the unimaginable scene in front of them, everyone present couldn't believe it. Seeing Chen Luo walking towards them step by step, everyone couldn't stop the fear in their hearts and kept stepping back. And far behind the crowd, the top leaders of the major forces also saw the abnormality happening to Chen Luo at this moment, and seeing that such a serious injury did not affect Chen Luo at all, they did not panic as soon as they expressed their hearts. This monster. Doesn't such an attack have any effect on him? Someone said with an extremely ugly face. I used to wonder where did he get his self-confidence, thinking that he could challenge all of us with his own strength, but now it seems that this butcher really has his own support. Someone shook his head and sighed. What are you talking about now? If you don't stop him at his speed, it will be difficult for us to leave today. As soon as these words came out, everyone who was at a loss immediately woke up. When they came back to their senses, a sharp light flashed in their eyes, and they gritted their teeth and said ruthlessly, since this is the case, then use that to solve him. I don't believe that if her body is blown to pieces, he can still recover. Speaking of this, everyone immediately ordered to take out another big gift they had prepared for Chen Luo and attack him. This is another layer of protection prepared by everyone to deal with Chen Luo, individual bazooka. This is a terrifying weapon that can easily penetrate armored vehicles and even tanks. Compared with the original mines, its lethality is several grades stronger. If it is hit by such a weapon, then even if Chen Luo can rely on his own ability to survive, but he couldn't escape a serious injury. Moreover, they have prepared more than one such weapon. The troops equipped with individual bazookas have 100 of them. If hundreds of shells are fired at Chen Luo's side at once, then even if his super speed regeneration tough, Chen Luo has no confidence to recover. Although there is the ability of the Source of Blood, which can be called a life-saving magic skill, as long as the Source Blood clan exists in the world, he can reappear in this world, but how long this process will last, he has no idea. Therefore, Chen Luo has no plans to try it. Just as the opponent sent troops equipped with individual rocket launchers to advance here, at the same time, the rest of the people also received orders to restrict Chen Luo's actions at all costs, in order to ensure that the artillery shells can accurately hit the opponent. The others also understood that at Chen Luo's speed, if there was no restriction, no matter how powerful the rockets were, they would not be able to cause any harm to Chen Luo if they failed to hit. And once Chen Luo is allowed to charge into the crowd, no one will be able to stop him at that time. Thinking of this, everyone forcibly suppressed the fear in their hearts. Blood gradually appeared in their eyes, raised the guns in their hands, roared and pulled the trigger. Go to hell, you bloody monster. Hurry up and shoot. Never let this monster come over. The next moment, dense gunshots sounded, and countless bullets shot towards Chen Luo's direction, trying to block the opponent's progress. Da-da-da. In just an instant, Chen Luo was covered by dense bullets, and the special bullets wrapped in ultraviolet rays hit his body directly. As the shells burst, Chun-Ji was instantly enveloped in a dazzling purple halo. However, when everyone was dumbfounded, this kind of attack had no effect on Chen Luo. Under the action of the steel body, the impact force brought by the bullet was like a breeze blowing on the face, which could not make Chen Luo's footsteps any less. There was a pause, and the ultraviolet rays, which are enough to cause great damage to vampires, are not a problem for Chen Luo, who has already eliminated all the weaknesses of vampires. Therefore, even in the face of a hail of bullets, Chen Luo was not affected at all and slowly approached the crowd in front of him 10 steps at a time. Looking at Chen Luo, who seemed to be fine, the murderous intent in everyone's eyes dissipated quickly, and the fear in his heart regained the upper hand. His body began to tremble slightly, and his movements gradually became stiff. How is this possible? This guy is immune to the effects of ultraviolet light. This monster, is he a Daywalker too? And what's the matter with his body? Bullets can't do any harm to him. Could it be that his body is made of steel? Behind the crowd, a group of senior executives looked at each other with fear in their eyes. With their eyesight, 043 can naturally see that the current situation has gradually changed in a direction that is unfavorable to them, but this is completely beyond everyone's expectations. But this can't be blamed on them. After all, they didn't know before that what they were about to face was such a monster. Not only did they have an indestructible body, but they also had extremely terrifying resilience. What's even more exaggerated was that the opponent was a Daywalker. Such an existence is completely beyond their comprehension. Since they couldn't stop the opponent's actions, whether the special force they had prepared could still play its due role, everyone had an answer to this point. Although they didn't want to believe it, they were more afraid of losing their own lives than of failure. So while ordering to stop Chen Luo desperately, the 10 high-ranking people all chose to retreat slowly. At the same time, Chen Luo seemed to have finally had enough of playing. The crazy murderous intent surged in his eyes, and the terrifying momentum like a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood came out through his body, instantly covering everyone in front of him. Immediately afterwards, with the movement of Chen Luo's feet, the speed was already at full speed. At his terrifying speed beyond the speed of sound, Chen Luo rushed into the crowd in less than a blink of an eye, and threw the butcher's knife at the crowd in front of him without any hesitation. In an instant, endless blood bloomed in the crowd. Chapter 98. Heavy Casualties. Allied Forces Defeated. Following a thin silver-white line across, hundreds of figures at the front of the crowd froze suddenly. Under the horrified gaze of countless people behind, a trace of blood appeared on the necks of these people, And then, their heads fell instantly. Seeing the companions whose bodies were gradually engulfed by the flames and gradually disappeared, these people finally couldn't stop the fear in their hearts and turned around to escape. With the actions of these people, the originally dense firepower instantly became much sparser. Knowing that the firearms could no longer cause damage to Chen Luo, many people simply discarded the firearms directly because they wanted to reduce the firepower when they escaped. Some burden. There are also some people whose hearts have been swallowed by fear, without any reason, holding up the guns in their hands, shooting wildly towards the surroundings, shouting with unknown meanings from their mouths, as if they have fallen into madness. Die. Monster, die for me. Don't come near me. Don't come here. Harlan, you bastard. Where the hell are you shooting at? Stop it for me, Damn it. These people are crazy. Don't worry about other things. Let me kill these people first. Affected by this group of people, some people turned their guns around one after another and launched an attack on the crowd who had fallen into madness. For a while, intensive gunshots rang out in the battlefield again. Definitely there are still a small number of people, suppressing the fear in their hearts. Their eyes are constantly scanning the surroundings, holding the guns in their hands, ready to attack at any time. There is no doubt that these people are also the real elite troops in this coalition army. Even if the coalition army has tens of thousands of people, the total number of such elites is only about 300, which is extremely rare. Everyone in this elite team has skills comparable to those of the Deathwalkers, and they are well-deserved trump cards in the hands of the major forces, possessing extremely high tactical literacy. It is precisely because of this that even though their superiors had already fled first, they still faithfully carried out the order to block Chen Luo. Even though they also had fear in their hearts, they did not stagnate in their actions. And the performance of this army was also noticed by Chen Luo, who was not far away. Looking at their performance, Chen Luo couldn't help but move, and a different thought arose in his mind. The movements of his hands were still incessant. Looking at the chaotic crowd in front of him, Chen Luo didn't have the slightest thought of mercy, brandishing the butcher knife in his hand. His body turned into a gust of wind and flashed across the crowd in an instant. Along with Chen Luo's work, nearly 100 lives died in Chen Luo's hands with just a flash, and his body turned into a series of torches, illuminating the night sky and looking extremely gorgeous. While slaughtering the collapsed coalition forces in front of him, Chen Luo didn't forget his business and kept searching the crowd with his eyes, as if he was looking for something. Those high-level executives have all shown their faces in front of Chen Luo before, so only by catching all these people can he gain greater benefits in this battle. In the battle some time ago, the Chen Luo family suffered heavy casualties, and now the only remaining family members are only about 400 to 500 people. Such a number is undoubtedly far from enough to occupy all the underground forces in New York. Therefore, when he decided to challenge himself only, Chen Luo made a good decision. This time, he will not kill all these people, but will select some people to join his family to make up for the losses suffered by the family. And in his opinion, the elite team whose combat power was comparable to that of the Deathwalkers was a good candidate. But to make such an elite choose to surrender, it is obviously not enough to use force alone. As an elite fighter who has been trained by the family for decades, or even hundreds of years, it is difficult to impress the loyalty of the family with the threat of death. The possible way to get this army is to start from the top. As long as all the top leaders of the coalition army are captured, with their status in the family, there will be a great possibility to convince them to join the Chen Luo family power. With this in mind, Chen Luo put a considerable amount of energy into the search process, and after spending less than 10 minutes, several familiar figures finally came into view. Found it. In the air, Chen Luo's somewhat vague voice came, and after hearing this voice, all the high-level executives who were fleeing in a panic were frightened and their bodies trembled. Their hearts were instantly filled with fear, and they panicked towards the distant place. Run everywhere. However, in Chen Luo's view, their speed was as slow as a tortoise crawling. Just a dodge, Chen Luo passed the crowd and stood in front of them. Turning around and looking at each other, Chen Luo said calmly, "Everyone, if you want to live, come with me." Hearing this, the people who thought they had lost hope, and their faces were ashen, suddenly cheered up, looked at each other, and then quickly nodded in agreement. Because it took a little time to find these people, most of the vampires have fled from the town, and the number is about 6,000. As for the other 4,000 people, cannibalism accounts for about 2,000 people. The 2,000 people were beheaded by Chen Luo one after another, and this kind of victory is only achieved by Chen Luo in less than 10 minutes. At his terrifying speed beyond the speed of sound, these vampires have no power to resist in front of him. Just a single encounter, hundreds of lives will be lost. Disappearing in his hands, such a terrifying killing efficiency is worthy of the name of a butcher. Chen Luo walked in front, leading the group of people behind him, and walked slowly towards the destination. After a while, when Chen Luo and his group came to the area where the original elite team was, Chen Luo stopped slowly and said without looking back, "Now it's time for you to play. As long as you can persuade them to surrender to me, I will let you live." But if you fail, then you don't have any need to stay in this world. Feeling the cold killing intent emanating from Chen Luo's body from time to time, everyone trembled in their hearts and then piled up smiling faces, repeatedly assuring Chen Luo to complete the task. It has to be said that under the threat of death, the efficiency of these people can be said to be surprisingly fast. They just went up and talked with him for a few minutes, and then turned back to Chen Luo with a happy face. My lord, everything has been dealt with. Starting today, these people will be loyal to you. At the same time, this elite army of about 300 people also came to Chen Luo, knelt down on one knee, lowered their heads, and swore allegiance to Chen Luo. As the last troop in the town declared its surrender, the battle has finally come to an end since then. It took no more than half an hour to add up. This battle, which was considered to be without any suspense by everyone, ended with Chen Luo's victory. Chapter 99. Taking advantage of the victory and pursuing huge gains. A day later, a news that shocked the entire dark world came from New York. As early as a day ago, the legendary Butcher came to challenge the entire coalition army alone. With one enemy 10,000, he defeated the coalition army head-on and won the battle. As for the source of the news, there is no need to doubt it, because this news came from the mouths of the vampire coalition soldiers who escaped from the town, so there is no need to doubt its credibility. As soon as this news came out, the entire dark world suddenly boiled, and countless people's faces were full of disbelief. When Chen Luo announced that he would challenge tens of thousands of coalition forces by himself, it can be said that almost everyone did not have any expectations for him, and many people even sneered secretly in their hearts, thinking that Chen Luo was too much. Such a decision is due to arrogance. Therefore, although this battle has not yet started, the balance in everyone's hearts has already tilted, thinking that Chen Luo is likely to fall in this battle. Not only them, but even the members of the Chen Luo family are faintly desperate for this battle, especially Blade and Nisha, who are constantly dissuading Chen Luo from giving up this idea, which shows that everyone is concerned about Chen Luo's decision. How unfavorable is 54. However, when the battle was over and the final result was spread, everyone was speechless. While shocked in their hearts, many still couldn't believe it. After all, this is a confrontation with tens of thousands of people with one's own strength, and those tens of thousands of people are all well-trained, with several times the physical fitness of ordinary people, and a vampire coalition with a lot of firepower in their hands. This kind of force is enough to conquer a small country, but even so, facing the Butcher Chen Luo, they still have no resistance at all. Seeing such a result, everyone refreshed their perception of Chen Luo's strength one after another. This kind of strength has made countless people terrified. I paid some attention, but Chen Luo had no time to take care of them. After subduing the most elite unit of the coalition army, Chen Luo also let go of the high-level coalition army as agreed, and then returned to New York with the 10 newly recruited subordinates. On the way back, Chen Luo was also surprised to find that he was left behind at random before. Although the Craven from the European vampire force was injured by a landmine, he still did not die. Chen Luo was very pleased with this. They caught him and brought him back together. After spending the day returning to base camp in New York, Chen Luo didn't have the slightest hesitation and immediately summoned everyone to launch a reaction against the territory previously occupied by the coalition forces. Now that the coalition forces have been defeated by Chen Luo, after the thousands of coalition forces fled the town, only a small number of them returned to New York, and everyone else ran towards the family's headquarters. As for the industries that took several months to occupy in New York, after the previous battle, they already understood that those industries no longer belonged to them. I'm afraid it's Chen Luo's ruthless slaughter. Therefore, when there are only 2 or 3 big cats and kittens in New York, the Chen Luo family has successfully regained the property that Mr. Yuan left. After recapturing these properties, Chen Luo still did not stop, stepping out of New York for the first time and heading towards other cities. The meaning of Chen Luo's actions is self-evident. Obviously, after this coalition incident, he did not intend to endure it and planned to liquidate the other families involved in this incident. It took only a week for Chen Luo to arrive at the base camp of one of the 12 clans. Under Chen Luo's invincible power, the other party was powerless to resist. Thousands of clansmen were killed by Chen Luo, leaving only half of them less than. If it wasn't for the fact that the current head of the family, BJDH, decided to surrender and join the Chen Luo family, I'm afraid they would not be able to escape the fate of destruction. After learning what Chen Luo had done during this period of time, the other major forces were even more terrified, and they were even more worried about Chen Luo's next actions, for fear that the other party would appear in front of their house in the next moment and kill them. Kill them all. Under such worries, the major families decided to contact Chen Luo after discussing secretly, offering compensation, hoping to get Chen Luo's forgiveness. In order to get Chen Luo to agree to a truce, they also paid a huge price this time, giving Chen Luo about 1/3 of their respective properties as compensation. You must know that this is the wealth that these families have accumulated for hundreds of years. Even if it is only 1/3, it is quite a terrifying figure. The combined value of large and small properties is 5 times that of Chen Luo's current property. Huge. If converted into money, it is a huge wealth of nearly 500 billion. Facing such a number, even Chen Luo couldn't help being tempted. After thinking for a while, Chen Luo finally agreed to the other party's request. In fact, according to Chen Luo's original plan, no matter what kind of compensation they make, if they dare to offend him, then there must be no reason to let the other party go. Only blood can vent his anger. However, although he thought so, he also had to face a reality, that is, their family's manpower is seriously insufficient now, even after supplementing thousands of people from one of the 12 clans. Today, the Chen Luo family has less than 3,000 members in total. With such a number, even the original Frost family would exceed this number, not to mention that at the moment is in his hands, but he has properties in 2 major cities. There are only about 3,000 vampires guarding an astonishing number of industries, which is undoubtedly a drop in the bucket. In addition, with the acquisition of another city, there are still many problems waiting for him to deal with. If he continues to attack other forces, even if he succeeds in destroying them and occupying the other party's property, he will not have enough strength to take care of them. Instead of this, it is better to give these properties to them for safekeeping, and when the time is ripe, he will find a reason to send troops to occupy them when he has enough manpower. Definitely the best for him. Thinking of this, Chen Luo finally nodded in agreement with the request from the major forces. Seeing that Chen Luo finally nodded, the leaders of the major forces also breathed a sigh of relief, as if they were afraid that Chen Luo would repent, and hurriedly donated the properties they had prepared to the Chen Luo family. After receiving the corresponding compensation, Chen Luo didn't stay any longer and set off immediately to return. As Chen Luo's action came to an end, for a while, Chen Luo's name spread again, which aroused the amazement of countless people. Chapter 100 Famous Magneto debuts. Europe. The headquarters of the Vampire Council is also the sleeping place of the 3 elders, the interior of a castle with a somewhat classical atmosphere. As usual, a group of vampires gathered here, wearing gorgeous dresses, handsome men and beautiful women gathered together, ear to ear, and the love was deep, and some people walked directly to the vacant room upstairs. After a long time, there were strange sounds coming from upstairs. In this regard, other people have long been surprised. Tillian and the others are really in a hurry. Among the crowd, a gorgeous woman with a fiery figure, fair skin, and a bit of amorous looks chuckled, then turned her head to look aside, and said with a smile, "What, Erica? Still worried about that craven guy?" Hearing this, Erica, who was sitting by the window, turned her head slowly. Her eyes were full of worry that couldn't be concealed, and she said with some worry, "Eva, I'm really worried. You said that craven won't be given by that butcher?" After a pause, he opened his mouth several times to say, but he couldn't say the last few words no matter what. Ever since the news of Chen Luo's terrifying deed of 1 against 10,000 came back a week ago, Erica has never received any news about Craven. This involuntarily gave her a bad premonition. Butcher. Hearing this name, Eva's eyes flashed an inexplicable light, and then she calmed down quickly and comforted with a smile. "Don't worry, I have made a special divination before. Craven the guy's life is not in danger. I think he should be back soon." "Really?" Hearing this, the worry in Erica's eyes disappeared, and her heart that had been tightly suspended finally relaxed, and a smile finally appeared on her face. "Since it's your prophecy, Eva, nothing will happen to Craven." Listening to her words, it is obvious that she trusts Eva's divination, and just after she finished saying this, she seemed to think of something suddenly. A trace of fear appeared on her face, and she said, "Eva, you should have heard about the butcher, right? Do you think he will? Will he come to Europe to seek revenge on us? If he does come here, can we stop him?" As soon as this remark came out, it immediately attracted the attention of everyone present. Thinking back to the waves caused by Chen Luo's reappearance recently, and the series of shocking achievements of the other party, the atmosphere in the room became stagnant in an instant. "Stand up. If that's the case, then it's hard to say." Shaking the wine glass in her hand, Eva's mouth slowly evoked a mysterious smile, and she said slowly, "Butcher Chen Luo, what a fun." Recalling the result of divination on this legendary butcher on a whim before, Eva was not looking forward to it. America, in a dense rainforest in the north. A small village is located here, and somewhere in this village, in an inconspicuous house, a tall, thin, gray-haired old man in a black robe was sitting on a seat, listening to the news Raven brought today. "Butcher, is that Chen Luo? He can be regarded as a real strong man. It's just a pity that he is not one of us. Eric, although he is not a mutant, that butcher is not human either. I think there should be a possibility of cooperation between us and him. And if we have him in our plan, the probability of success will be greatly improved." Mystique Raven's eyes flashed, and he spoke slowly. "Oh, Raven, is that why you like him so much?" Eric raised his head slightly, with a hint of curiosity flashing across his face. "Yes." Hearing this, Raven looked at him seriously and nodded solemnly. After hearing the news that Chen Luo was going to challenge the entire vampire coalition with one enemy 10,000, Raven also became very curious about it. With the idea of taking a look, she even used her mutant ability to incarnate the coalition. One of them took part in the battle. And in that battle, she finally saw the strength of the legendary butcher, and after seeing Chen Luo's true strength, to be honest, she was really shocked and full of heart. It was shocking. With a body made of steel, it was so fast that she had no time to react, coupled with the terrifying self-healing ability comparable to Sabretooth, and it didn't have the weakness that ordinary vampires have. Ask for flowers. 0. It is no exaggeration to say that in her eyes, Chen Luo is a killing machine with no dead ends. Such terrifying strength, even in Mutant Brotherhood, exists only under Magneto Eric. A strong man of this strength, with her strength, is completely unable to compete with it. If she hadn't seen the opportunity and used ability to escape early, Chen Luo, who was massacred indiscriminately, would have unintentionally decapitated her. It is precisely because they understand the horror of Chen Luo's strength that they are more confident in completing what they are planning. Only if a strong person like Chen Luo joins in. And after learning about Chen Luo's true strength from Raven, Eric's eyes became more dignified. After a moment of silence, he finally nodded slowly and said, 0. Then give it a try. Raven, I will leave this matter to you. Don't worry. Raven nodded, then turned and left immediately. Meanwhile, New York's Edgewood Grand Penthouse. In the luxurious huge amounts of apartment, Chen Luo stood beside the swimming pool outside the apartment, looking up into the distance. After a moment of silence, he turned around slowly and saw that his body was trembling uncontrollably when he was escorted by his subordinates behind him. Craven smiled slightly, waved his hand and said, Go down first. I have something to do. I want to talk to Mr. Craven alone. Exclamation point. After hearing this, the two let go of their hands, leaving Craven here alone, and exited the room one after another. Craven was trembling, keeping his head down all the time, not daring to look up at the other person at all, even though Chen Luo didn't make any movements, but as long as he recalled the original scene, he couldn't help but be filled with fear. Looking at each other, Chen Luo's calm voice sounded, Mr. Craven, I think it's time for us to have a good chat. I have some questions here that I want to ask you to understand. If you can give me a satisfactory answer, I can assure you that you can get out of here safely. Hearing this, Craven seemed to grasp a glimmer of hope, suppressed his fear, and hurriedly nodded in agreement. A trembling voice sounded, Willing to serve you. Master Chen Luo and